הוא עזב. Welcome to ILTV's special live broadcast. I'm Lidar Gavelazi, and today we await the return of 3 hostages, Agam Berger, Arbel Yehud, and Gadi Moses, as well as 5 Thai nationals, all set to be released from Hamas captivity in Gaza after over 482 days. Today marks the 3rd release of hostages in this first phase of the Qatar-mediated ceasefire deal. It's a special release today, one that was not pre-planned, but rather renegotiated by Israel after Hamas breached the terms of the original agreement by failing to release Arbel Yehud, a female civilian that was supposed to have been released last week. Joining her today is Agam Berger, the last of the IDF observers, 4 of whom, Liri, Daniela, Neama, and Karina, were released just last week on Saturday. And we already have received word that Agam Berger has been transferred to the IDF. And joining her is Gadi Moses, the first elderly man to be released since the hostages were taken captive over 15 months ago. He is 80 years old, and he's been held for over 15 months of captivity. And Hamas is also releasing 5 civilians from Thailand, not part of the 33 Israelis set to be released in this first phase. I'll remind our viewers that Hamas kidnapped not only Israeli civilians, but nationals of dozens of other countries on October 7th. And today, 5 of them will be released as well. And joining us today for our special broadcast is ILTV's Shosh Bedrosian and Ariella Lechiani reporting from Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, where families of the hostages are gathering to witness the releases today. We'll be with them shortly. And in the studio with me is Caleb Ben-David, journalist and former Israel bureau chief of Bloomberg. And we'll have more guests joining us as well throughout the broadcast. So, Caleb, we're seeing the first visuals coming out of right now Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud, who have been held by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Right. And we've received word that Agam Berger has crossed into Israeli territory.
Right, Lidar, I think today's release is very significant towards basically the future of further releases. Just imagine just a few days ago, there were questions about whether Phase 1 would continue, whether Hamas would give the full list of the 33 hostages, or those are the remaining, their conditions, whether they would honor their agreement to release the civilians first, and of course that came up with Arbel Yehud, whether Islamic Jihad would cooperate with Hamas in terms of the release. And the fact that we're all seeing this happen now, I think the odds went from just, I would say, a few days ago where it was 50-50 if we would see the release of all the further hostages in Phase 1 has now moved more into the positive side of things. I think this bodes well for at least the completion of the Phase 1 hostage release deal.
Absolutely. And we're seeing now the images of Agam Berger's release. She was also paraded on stage, as we saw last week. I mean, how does this compare to last week's release as well, when the 4 girls were paraded on stage? I see we're seeing her in the same sort of military-style attire. She's receiving the certificate of being a hostage.
Yes, I mean...
And the gift bag that they're giving to the hostage is absolutely ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous. Of Hamas, of course, trying to exploit the situation as a so-called victory. There are some slight differences. We don't see the crowds, the masses with guns, which was very alarming in the last release. You had a feeling maybe the situation could explode there and the girls could be in danger. Supposedly, Hamas was pressured by, for example, Qatar, due to objections to this, and maybe they slightly toned it down, but still humiliating, I would say, a last act of abuse against the hostages to display them in this manner. But again, we see her reaction, as we saw from all the hostages released so far, the spirit, the Israeli spirit and the fighting spirit, unbowed after unbelievable conditions in all those months in captivity.
Absolutely. We see the same resilience in these first images of Agam Berger walking. She seems to be, at least, she looks like she's able to walk in decent physical condition. And we know from the hostages released last week that they were actually given supplements ahead of their release to make them look healthier than they actually were. That's been reported in the Israeli press.
What we actually also learned is the conditions they were in, months in these tunnels, in darkness, but they were able to draw some strength from each other. Remember, these are the observers. They were soldiers. They're leaving, in a way, kind of as soldiers, because we know Hamas has made them put on uniforms, not their original uniforms.
Yeah.
That was just another sort of propaganda move of Hamas. But I think what really has surprised people is, as I said before, the resilience, how well certainly the initial round of hostages, especially these young women, have been able to do it. And we see that. We're watching it live right now. Of course, we don't know her mental state and what she went through, but still, just to see those pictures, as distressing as they are to some degree, they are also, to some degree, encouraging in terms of the spirit of these young women.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we've gotten word that Agam Berger has crossed over into Israeli territory, so she is back home in Israel after 482 days in captivity. So that is absolutely wonderful news. And soon we hope to see Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud be released and be transferred to the Red Cross and then to the IDF. So we're seeing images on the screen again of really mobs. I mean, you can see this.
Sure.
And right now, I think we're seeing Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses making their way through these Palestinian mobs, Hamas supporters, Hamas terrorists, making their way over to be transferred to the Red Cross. You know, now this is a bit of a different circumstances because Arbel Yehud, Gadi Moses, they were not held by Hamas. They were held by a separate terrorist faction, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Right, which is why I think it's so significant that they're being released today. There was concern whether Islamic Jihad would cooperate with the hostage deal that was basically negotiated by Hamas. There were even reports that, for example, their release might be delayed even today because, of course, Palestinian Islamic Jihad takes its marching orders from Iran, and whether Iran would want to, in some way, complicate this hostage deal, certainly to exploit it. So it is very encouraging if that is indeed the cars carrying the two. I also have to say, Gadi Moses, that's one of the big surprises of today. You showed earlier a bit of footage of where he and Arbel were hugging each other. Gadi Moses, 80 years old. There was a lot of concern about his condition, one of the oldest remaining hostages. I spoke several times during the course of the past year with Yair Moses, his son, who expressed concern about his father's health, whether he might get medication he needs. And Gadi Moses looking, I would say, again, we don't know because we don't know the mental condition they're in or really what they're ailing, but certainly to see him seem in reasonably good condition allays a lot of the fears that we were going into.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at this, you know, mobs just running after the car with Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud inside. You can only imagine what's going through their minds right now. It's seeing these scenes, seeing these mobs of I mean, really thousands of people, it seems, have gathered there. And
this is Khan Yunis. They were released there, and that's a real stronghold of Hamas. They were actually released in what they called Sinwar Square initially. They had their, I guess, brief ceremony, which had been the home of Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader.
Yeah, so we're seeing them surrounded. It's unclear which car they're in, but we're told that they are in one of the vehicles and that they will be transferred. Now, it's interesting to see if the Palestinian Islamic Jihad will put them through the same show that Hamas has been putting the hostages. I mean, what can you tell from these pictures? I don't see a stage.
No, I think that process may have already been or happened. I mean, I don't know. I mean, those cars appear to be the Red Cross cars that we saw earlier. So I don't know if that indicates that they've already been put in. We don't know fully what happened in their transfer. You know, that footage we saw earlier of Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud was obviously taken earlier in the morning. So there's a couple of hours where we don't have the footage yet of what took place during their release. So that may come out later. So I don't know if they're taking them. But those do look like the Red Cross cars, which means that they're already on their way to be handed over, for example, to the IDF. It may take a little longer. Khan Yunis is on the southern edge, more in the, not southern edge, but more in the southern half of the Gaza Strip. So they have a little longer to go, and you can see they're moving quite, if these are live images, they're moving quite slowly there. So this may take a little more time than the release we saw of Agam Berger earlier. But again, it's of course distressing to see these kind of pictures. And the IDF was active in Khan Yunis, invested a tremendous amount of military effort, especially destroying the tunnel system there, which was considered sort of almost like became the headquarters of Hamas. And again, a show of strength, in this case by Islamic Jihad, which is, again, just really basically a tool of Iran, their sort of proxy force in the Gaza Strip.
Absolutely. And from what we understand as well, you know, Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses were not held together, but they were reunited this morning.
Right, but correct, but they are both from kibbutz near Oz, both kidnapped from them. Gadi Moses was apparently one of the most leading figures of the kibbutz. He's actually an agronomist of some international renown, a prominent figure. So they certainly do have familiarity with each other, and you could see that in that earlier footage. When they were released. Both, of course, have family members and loved ones that were killed during the October 7th assault on Nir Oz. So you could see that in the reaction to each other.
Yes, you can see the affection, sort of he hugs her. You really see that affection there. Absolutely. And then what we're seeing now are just, I mean, thousands of Palestinians, looks like mostly men, surrounding the vehicles. We are waiting to see the first images of Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud being transferred over to the Red Cross. And right now we're just seeing mobs surrounding the vehicles. We see a number of vehicles there. It's unclear if those are the Palestinian Islamic Jihad vehicles or the Red Cross vehicles.
Right. It's hard. Obviously, one looks like has a Palestinian flag. I assume that is from Hamas or the PIJ. It's now they're not even moving at all. I mean, this again, I stress this was the handover that generated the most concern, because Palestinian Islamic Jihad, basically, even though it functions sort of under Hamas, it has its own chain of command structure, and a lot of concern about the details of this. So this is the one that really gave people a lot of concern going in, and hopefully it's going to be completed without any complications. Yeah.
All right, and now I want to transfer over to Shosh Bedrosian and Ariella Lichiani, who are standing by in Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. What's the atmosphere like there? What can you tell us?
Yeah, so a very exciting atmosphere here. Both of us arrived, and Zariel is actually first time being in Hostage Square since this hostage release first began just a few weeks ago. Tell us what your impression of it. For me, it is a lot of people have started to fill up this square. When you have walked in, what's it like for you to be here?
Electrifying. I've not experienced anything like this. The last hostage release, I was at the hospital, and it was different. We were waiting, there was lots of press, but this, friends, family, you know, this for the past 16 months almost has been a spot where people rally and protest, and for everyone to come together here with some excitement, with some hope, it's magical. It's amazing to be here.
Exactly. It's a special moment to see this square filled with hope. There's a different feeling being in Hostage Square now. A lot of Agam Berger's friends are actually here. They have signs. When that video came out of her on stage inside of Gaza and her being handed over from Hamas to the Red Cross, it was a very exciting moment. Their posters were in the air. They were screaming. They were watching the live stream here. It's being broadcasted on the big screen. What was it like for you to see the friends in real time react to the news that she is out and she's coming home?
It's something that I think we've all said collectively in Israel, that you feel you know these people, you feel connected to them, you love them, you miss them, we're all waiting for them to come home. So to be present when her actual loved ones are here and celebrating that, it's beyond moving to be a part of that, and it embodies what I think the whole country's been feeling for 16 months. We're all waiting for all the hostages to come home. So it's incredible. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, and Lidar, you mentioned before that Gadi Moses and Yarbel Yehud are actually on their way to the point where they will be handed over to the Red Cross. We want to talk a little bit about them, their stories, who they are. Gadi Moses is 80 years old. He's the oldest hostage and first male to be released from captivity in this ceasefire deal. Yarbel Yehud there's been some dispute over her release over the last few days. According to Israel, she should have been released before the soldiers came out, the female soldiers last week. Because of that, we're now seeing 6 hostages released this week. A surprise that caught all of us. The fact that we have 6 hostages coming out instead of 3 on Saturday is a big surprise, a big moment for these families, especially Gadi Moses' family.
Right.
There was no expectation, I think, of him actually coming out, the first male hostage, 80 years old, to be coming out in this deal. It's something that it's a historic moment to see.
And we also have the 5 Thai nationals as well. You know, there have been Thai hostages also kidnapped on October 7th, and today 5 are coming out as well. Now they're not quite part of the same deal, so they're being released in a separate arrangement. Palestinian prisoners will not be released in exchange for them as they are for Israeli hostages. But you know, Thailand and Israel have been pushing for the release of their citizens, so it's a monumental day for sure.
Yeah, tell us the importance of these Thai hostages being released. They've been held, in addition to these Israeli hostages, for 480 plus days. It's not just Israelis that we've mentioned. These are people that were taking, these Thai workers, they worked on farms.
Exactly.
They worked on the kibbutzim.
Exactly.
Talk about the weight of finally having these people released. I mean, it's taken forever.
It's taken forever, and I think, you know, it's extremely sad to say, but they've been somewhat overlooked. But we know from hostages that have already been released, we know that the Thai hostages were severely abused. They were often treated with violence. They were often they've received a lot of racism from Hamas terrorists. So it's huge that they're coming out as well, and will also begin this road to recovery.
And Shosh and Ariella, I want to ask you guys, you know, we hear that Agam Belger is back in Israel, back on Israeli territory. We're seeing images now of the 4 IDF observers, Liri Albag, Naama Levi, Karina Arayev, and Daniela Gilboa, who are watching her now, watching her release. We have images of them smiling. I mean, really heartwarming images. What was the atmosphere like in the square when you heard that she was released, when you saw that she was transferred over to the IDF?
I mean, beautiful, but also heartbreaking. You know, we saw on Saturday the 4 other female soldiers together, and they were smiling, they were holding hands. That feeling of being together for sure gave them a lot of strength. And today to see Agam by herself on a stage surrounded by hundreds of Hamas terrorists, I mean, it's distressing to watch. But of course the crowd here started singing and dancing and clapping, and it was extremely emotional. But we just hope that Agam's recovery coming out alone won't be significantly harder than the other 4 who were released last week.
Yeah, we've been watching the body language of these hostages coming out. The 4 that we saw on Saturday, the 4 female soldiers that were released, they had these smiles, these moments of defiance. We've learned their backstories, that they smiled just to defy what Hamas told them to do. They said they wouldn't speak, but you saw them in strength together. And to see today Agam's face, you could see that the last week she was separated from those 4 girls she was held with for pretty much the duration of her captivity. To see this long face, it's complicated. There's a lot of emotions. I can't imagine what the last week has been like for her, separated from these girls she spent so much time with. But there's a lot of psychological aspects to this. We saw, once again, a ceremony of Agam, right? We don't know what the next phase will look like when it comes to Gadi and Arbel being released, because they were in the hands of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But, you know, we heard that Agam was released in Khan Yunis, outside the home of Sinwar. There's symbolism to that. The last female soldier to be released from Hamas captivity. So we're just waiting for the next 2 to come out. Lidar?
Yeah, and for what we understand, Agam is going to be transferred to the IDF base in Re'im, where she will be reunited with her family, and then she will join her 4 IDF observer friends in the hospital at Bellinson, hospital where she will, of course, undergo testing, and they will sort of try and hug her and welcome her back as she gets reacclimated to life here in Israel. So Shosh and Ariella, thank you so much, and we'll be returning to you later. And right now, I want to introduce in our studio, we have Colonel Amit Asa joining us, former member of the Israel Security Agency. So what do you make? You're seeing these first images. What comes to mind?
Yep. First, we are all very, very happy to see them, as we are happy that we saw all the hostages came last week. It's not just the hostages' families are smiling today, optimistically. It's all Israel, all the community of Israel and all over the world. We are optimistic today because we see them well, as much as we know now, well on their feet, getting out from the hands of the monsters. And we hope and we have optimistic view to the future to see the others getting out. Of course, there is a lot of complexity in this occasion, especially that we see now jihadi Islam holding the hostages and getting them back separately from the Hamas. We will see now how it will end because we saw them already alive, but we have to be very patient.
Absolutely. Until they're not in Israeli hands, until they're not on Israeli soil. And we hope that we'll be able to report that good news in just a little while. And, I want to ask you, Hamas is still very clearly in control of Gaza. And now we also see that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is standing strong. We see this, mob of supporters surrounding the hostages. What can you tell us? I mean, what are the capabilities today of Hamas, of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad?
I think what is important, it's not just the army capability or the attack or operational capability of Hamas and Jihadist Islam. It's more what the capability of them to control and rule the Palestinian in Gaza. And I think that they are still ruling Gaza. They are still holding the positions that everybody have to do what they say. And this is the most important thing that we have to cut after this deal, because we can't handle Hamas or Jihadist Islam taking over control Gaza, a municipality, and controlling the all Gaza population again. Because we know what will happen in the future. Mm-hmm. They have to get down from the stage.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and we're seeing right now visuals of mobs of Palestinians waiting for the transfer, waiting to see the first images of Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud being transferred to the Red Cross. Caleb, it's very striking when you see these mobs, standing outside waiting for these hostages. We're told of, the innocent civilians in Gaza, but it's striking to me that you see so many Palestinians. Are they innocent civilians? Are they?
Well, I think we have to keep things in proportion. First of all, there are nearly 2 million people in Gaza. Of course, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are going to have their supporters there. They're still control, as Amit said. They're still the people, the only people, the Palestinians with guns in Gaza. So they are still the effective ruling force there. Their military capability has definitely been degraded severely. But unfortunately, we haven't yet seen an alternative set up to rule Gaza in their place. And that is, of course, going to be the key issue in what we call the phase 2 of the hostage release, the discussion for the so-called day after Hamas. I would argue that phase actually began yesterday with the meeting of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Trump administration's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. Clearly, and some reports are coming out, they started to discuss the so-called day after. That is the key. Some kind of alternative has to be set up. In terms of the Palestinian civilians there, to win the hearts and minds of those Palestinians, to shift them from that, has to be a process of having them an alternative to put their loyalty to. They're not going to come up and stand up against Hamas as long as Hamas is the only force with guns. And we have to see some other kind of effective military force on the Palestinian side, or perhaps a foreign force. We already have American contractors, security contractors, armed, dealing with the transfer of the, or regulating the return of those in the South Gaza to North Gaza. That's unprecedented. We've kind of ignored all that in this. Suddenly you have American security contractors, reportedly also people coming from the Gulf, which could be the start of everything. And that's going to have to be the question about the future. And we can get into it a little later more about what to do with the civilians in Gaza, because as we know, the Trump administration put forward this talk about at least temporarily transferring them to Egypt and Jordan.
Absolutely. So we'll get into all of that in just a minute. And we're getting word that it seems the Hamas wants to release or transfer Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehoud outside of the apartment building where Yahya Sinwar was taken out. So that is a very interesting choice, a very interesting venue. Amit, what do you make of that?
It's all a big show, you know.
Yeah.
We know that they want to do the show. They are considering very specifically what is the location, the best location for them to show, especially for the Palestinians in Gaza, that they are ruling, they are doing whatever they want because they are the force there. It's a sign for the Palestinians and also to the world that they are there. And the images is very important because it's making them very strong. And the occasion, this kind of a show, it's very important for them.
So yeah, we've seen from the previous releases as well that they really are putting on a show for the world. And of course, we can't forget how this all began on October 7th with a massacre, kidnapping, and all the atrocities that these hostages have endured for over 15 months. And now I want to talk a little bit about the security situation. You know, as Caleb mentioned, the IDF has withdrawn from the Netzarim corridor. We're seeing hundreds of thousands of Gazans returning to the north. How does this complicate the security situation for Israel, for the IDF, to be able to continue to operate in Gaza? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that if the situation will lead us to start the war again, of course, this kind of situation of civilians, again, in areas that we want to act in will be a problem. But as we know to move the civilians from one place to another very fast. We proved it in Rafah. We proved it few times in the north. So I think if there will be any situation that we will have to fight again in the northern side of Gaza, again, we will have to put out all the civilians back into the middle or the central area of Gaza Strip, meaning the places near Khan Yunis. Of course, for the civilians, it's not a good thing, but they will not have any choice for that. Another aspect is that if we are getting them the opportunity to get into these areas that the IDF was leaving, they are reorganizing there operationally to wait for the army to get in again. So it will be more complicated, more dangerous for us to get into these places again because of all the bombs that they will leave there, all the facilities that they will prepare for the returning of the IDF. And this is a very bad situation in the aspect of IDF, but I think that we will handle it.
So we're getting word that the Red Cross is on its way now to meet the hostages, and we see, of course, them preparing for the show. Caleb, you wanted to
I just saw one other security complication that we haven't touched on so far is that today is also going to see the release of dozens of more Palestinian security prisoners, ultimately going to be hundreds, going back high level. These are terror leaders, murderers, rapists that are going back in some cases to cities in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank, some even into East Jerusalem. And we should first of all acknowledge also the pain for some Israelis who are people who either lost their loved ones to terror attacks by those prisons being released today, or they themselves were victims coming down here to the studio today. For example, I heard on the radio one of the victims of Zacharia Zubeidi, one of the leaders of the Second Intifada, a terrorist involved in multiple murders, and one of those people that was severely injured in attacks that he directed, talking about how painful this day is for him. Yeah. Because seeing someone like Zubeidi being released. So, and some of these people have objected to the hostage deal because of what they went through and their concerns going forward. So we have to just, even as we're joyful about seeing, for example, Agam Berger, let's recognize the pain and difficulty for many Israelis for the price that is being paid for today.
It's absolutely a bittersweet day, and I think the numbers are that they're releasing 110 Palestinian prisoners, terrorists, 33 who are serving consecutive life sentences. So absolutely bittersweet. Now, we're awaiting the release of Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehoud. And so, you know, who are these hostages being released today? Gadi Moses, as we said, is the first male civilian to be released, 80 years old. Let's take a closer look at his story.
More than 40 days after he was kidnapped outside his home on Kibbutz Nir Oz, hostage Gadi Moses is officially set to be released from captivity. He is the oldest hostage and first man to be released as part of the ceasefire hostage deal. A day from hell on October 7th for his family. Upon release, Moses will learn the fate of his partner, Efrat Katz, who was murdered on that day. Katz's daughter and her 2 grandchildren were kidnapped with Moses' ex-wife, Margalit, and all 3 were released in the hostage deal in November of 2023. Moses is known for working as a peace activist who advocated for Palestinian rights and peace. On October 7th, Moses even tried to bargain with terrorists as they demanded money from him and the keys to his car before they abducted him. Moses is a potato expert and renowned agronomist who frequently lectured on agriculture. He's the founding member of the kibbutz's vineyard and helped maintain its community vegetable garden. In December of 2023, Islamic Jihad released a propaganda video of Moses, who pleaded in the video for the government to make a deal to release him. Known for his sociable and kind nature and belief in coexistence, the 80-year-old reached his milestone birthday while in captivity last March.
Absolutely. I mean, kidnapping grandparents, children.
Right. Just a couple of points. First of all, some surprises. When it was announced that Gadi Moses a couple of days ago was going to be released, really the first man and elder man, there was some surprise because a lot of people thought, for example, Keith Siegel, who holds American citizenship, might be the first release given the pressure the Trump administration has put on the mediators to get the American hostages released. So there was also some concern, was he being released because of his physical condition? A lot of people were concerned he might be coming out in a stretcher. So it certainly was also a happy surprise to see how well he looked. And I just want to say, because I spoke, as I said before, with members of his family, especially his son Yair over the past year, and a brief line in there, he truly believed in coexistence and worked and wanted to, together with the Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip. And it's just shocking.
As did many of
those hostages. And for them to be treated in this way and held in this way, you know, was a wake-up call. It relates to your question before about dealing, you know, the question of the civilians and their support. So it was especially discouraging to see someone like Gadi Moses, who believes so much in trying to work for coexistence, at least with the civilians in the Gaza Strip, to see what happened to him.
I mean, we remember the video that Hamas released of the 5 IDF observers, and we saw, I believe it was Naama Levy saying, you know, I have friends in Gaza. I have friends, and they were peace activists. They were working together with Palestinians, but that
you should also,
if
that picture of the 4 female observers, it's worth reminding the story that apparently they had a discussion among themselves while they were being released, and they realized that Agam Berger would not be released, that one of them would stay volunteer and stay with her
Absolutely
in captivity.
incredible.
I mean, the heroism to do that, because you don't know what's going to happen and subsequently. It's just remarkable.
No, I think these four women have shown
remarkable.
just remarkable courage, bravery, resilience. And this picture here,
Yes.
this is being hailed here in Israel as their victory picture. You can see them smiling,
Right.
waving, the defiance in the face of all that they've endured for the past 15 months. And the fact that one of them would stay behind, asked to stay behind with her friend is just
Right, which was
absolutely
Hamas.
incredible.
It only didn't happen because Hamas refused to do it.
Yeah.
But just an incredible spirit, human spirit.
And Hamas, look, Hamas is, what are we seeing now? We're seeing, I think, visuals of Agam Berger, again, being released, paraded on stage, as we've seen, by herself.
This was earlier.
With the show, waving.
Waving again, the spirit.
Again, we know that, the spirit, but we also know that Hamas sometimes instructs them, to wave to the crowds. As we know, it's all for show. Now, Amit, I want to ask you, because Hamas has a great incentive to ensure that these three hostages are released today, as well as the three hostages that are expected to be released on Saturday. We still don't know who those hostages are going to be. And in exchange, Israel is set to start its withdrawal from Rafah. Again, I ask, how is this going to complicate the security situation? Because right now, what is preventing Hamas from rearming is Israeli control of the Philadelphia corridor, Israeli control of the border with Egypt. If Israel starts to withdraw, this will allow Hamas to rearm, essentially.
Yeah, of course, what we see now at the steps of this deal, that every step we are losing something in our security measures. And one of them is Philadelphia corridor, meaning we will not have any kind of control of what will get in from Egypt inside, and a lot of ammunition maybe, and maybe other arms that they will need. Of course, the Egyptian will do the most that they can to stop that, but we know that in the past they cooperated with the Hamas for getting this arm inside, so we can't give them the chance to save it or to watch for this activity. Of course, this is one of the prices that we are giving now or losing now in these stages, but we have to bring them home. And then I think we will have to consider that also from Philadelphia, if we are getting the ability to the Hamas to get in from there or to get out, this is a thing that we have to take into consideration. And the most dangerous thing that I think that it's on the table now is Hamas can take hostages out of Gaza Strip to the area of Egypt, and from there anywhere in the world. And this is the most dangerous thing that can happen. That's why I think that we can't leave Philadelphia area, but this is part of the deal.
Absolutely. And, Caleb, there seems to be sort of contradiction because, will Israel end this war in order to get all the hostages out? Will it permanently leave Gaza? Or, the Israeli security establishment seems to be insisting on the fact that we are going to go back in, we are going to resume this war. So what's your take on this? And just before we continue, we are seeing now, we're seeing the Re'im Agam Berger arriving in Israel, on Israeli soil. We're seeing her being transferred now to the Re'im base, where she is supposed to be finally reunited with her parents, with her family after 482 days. So this is a very, very joyful news to be able to report on this, and hopefully we'll get the images of her arriving there in just a moment. So we're seeing now her being accompanied by security forces, by the IDF. arriving at the Re'im base in southern Israel. She's going to be reunited with her parents. And then after that, she's going to be transferred over to the hospital to reunite with her 4 friends that she was held in captivity with for over 15 months. So, Caleb, until we get these final visuals, so back to you. So what about this sort of,
those are great questions, Ladar,
Yeah.
and I presume that part of that was the discussion, as we mentioned yesterday, between Steve Witkoff, the Trump administration's envoy to the Middle East, and Benjamin Netanyahu, and even more so in the visit next week. And this is going to be everything you just asked about what's going to happen in Gaza is crucial to that meeting next week between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Donald Trump. I mean, that is going to be a key discussion about what's decided there. Like I said before, I think the odds now are in favor that we'll see the completion of phase 1. But phase 2 is a big question mark in so many regards. Will Israel be able to come to some kind of agreement with any of the parties involved about what kind of governance there'll be in the Gaza Strip moving forward? Will Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states take an active part in it? Will the Palestinian Authority be in any part of it? The Prime Minister has said no, the Palestinian Authority will not have a role in the governance of Gaza. There is some talk of a plan in which Palestinian civilian technocrats, not directly connected to the PA, might be part of that governance. Will the PA allow it? And then I said before, there is the proposal by President Trump to transfer some of the civilians out into Egypt and Jordan. Egypt and Jordan already have said absolutely not. So I don't think on a practical level that's likely to happen, but there's good reason for President Trump to even raise that. One is to provide some political cover for Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the other to pressure the Palestinians to make some of the concessions we talked about, or else said, if not, well, the alternative might be this plan I put forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And before we see the visuals of Agam reuniting with her family, I want to go over now to Shosh and Ariella in Hostages Square. Shosh and Ariella, are you with us? Yeah. Okay, so we're seeing the convoy with Agam Berger going now, arriving at the Re'im base in the south. What can you tell us about the next steps that Agam is going to go through, similar to what her 4 friends went through last week?
Right, so all 3 hostages will go through some assessments before being transferred to hospitals and reuniting with their extended family. Each 3 hostage will also be transferred to a separate hospital. So Agam will go to Beilinson, where the other 4 female soldiers were transferred to last week, and there she'll be reunited with them. Gadi, who's 80 years old, of course, and 16 months in captivity is brutal for anyone, let alone an 8-year-old man. So he will be assessed, and if he is stable, he'll be transferred to Ichilov in Tel Aviv, and if not, he'll go to Soroka in Beersheba, which is nearer, and Arbel Yehud will go to Sheba in Sheba Medical Center in Tel Aviv.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so both of these hostages have their own stories, of course, like we've continued to say. While they spent 480 plus days in captivity, each one has their own story. Both of them, Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses, are from Kibbutz Nir Oz. This morning, PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who was holding both of these hostages, released a video this morning of the 2 of them reuniting. Of course, this was propaganda video, but it did seem as if these 2 had not seen each other in months. They reunited with a big hug. Both of them have their own stories. Arbel Yehud, of course, there has been dispute over her release. She was supposed to be released before the female soldiers. She was kidnapped from Nir Oz in the same home with her boyfriend, her partner Ariel, who is still in captivity at this time. She has lived on Kibbutz Nir Oz with her family for 3 generations. This is a family that has loved that region. They've been there. They believe in it. They have pride in their kibbutz. Gadi Moses His family also lived on Nero's. He was known as a peace activist. He wanted coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. On October 7th, he was kidnapped outside of his own home, even trying to bargain his way out of it, trying to talk down these terrorists from taking him. They kidnapped him in his own vehicle. His partner, Efrat, was murdered that day. His ex-wife, Margalit, was actually kidnapped. In addition to Efrat's children, her daughter and two granddaughters were also taken hostage. They were released back in the November of 2023 deal. This family has a lot of tragedy. You wonder, Arbel's brother was murdered. Gadi's wife, his partner, was murdered. These people are coming out of Hamas captivity with tragedies they likely don't know about yet. Not only are they experiencing and coming out to tell their own stories, but they will be able to
I want to
hear
stop
the
you
stories they
because
don't know about.
you're hearing clapping. We hear the clapping, the joy in the background. We've received word that Agam Berger has now reunited with her family for the first time in 482 days. And of course, we just heard the atmosphere over there at Hostage Square, the clapping in the background, the shouts of joy. So really an incredible reunion after 482 days. Now, Shosh and Ariella, you've both been following the hostages that have already been released, Agam's friends, this past week. There's been a lot of details that we've received, that we've heard from them about their time in captivity. What can you tell us, some of the stories that you've heard?
I mean, there are some tragic stories coming out, and we expect more and more to come out, as more hostages come out, and also as time goes on and they start speaking out more. One of the stories from Naama Levy is just harrowing. For the first 50 days of her captivity, she was held alone. And then when she was reunited with her friends who she was on base with, she actually asked them, "Are we alive?" That's just an indication of quite how disoriented she will have been. Daniela Gilboa also had a bullet still in her leg, and also more injuries are coming out. Emily Damari, we of course knew while she was in captivity that she had lost her 2 fingers from other hostages who came out and gave that detail. But since coming out, she also had a gunshot wound to the leg. Also another hostage, Amit Susana, who was released in November 2023, and she was actually the first hostage to speak out about the sexual abuse she was subjected to. She recounted that while she was in captivity, she had been tied up upside down, and Hamas was essentially threatening her. They believed she was an IDF officer, and they were threatening to kill her, saying, if you don't tell us the truth, we're going to kill you. And Liri Albag, who was released just last week, a young woman, went to the captors and convinced them that she was not an IDF officer, and this, for all we know, could have saved Amit's life. So more and more stories are coming out.
Yeah, we're hearing about this resilience. One of those stories, like you said, Liri was known as the leader of these girls, the one that was able to negotiate with these captors while in captivity, the strength these girls have. But I also want to talk about the solidarity they shared. When they were released from Hamas captivity, these 4 soldiers last weekend, they had braids in their hair. And these braids are a symbol. They're a symbol because it's known that Agam was the one that was braiding their hairs. It was a moment of defiance, a moment that she was with them even when they were leaving. They had these braids in their hair as they were on that stage in Gaza while they were leaving. It said that Agam has braided other people's hair, and it's been almost a symbol for this family. Agam's still in captivity, but she's with us, and I think it's a testament of these hostages. We've seen them come out, share their stories with strength, with pride, knowing that.
And we also heard that one of the 4 released last week actually wanted to stay in captivity with Agam, which is just, mind-blowing. But finally, she's home. She is here with us now.
So I wanna just share with our viewers what we're seeing on the screen now are Agam's parents watching her as she's being released, as she's being transferred. You see the relief, the joy on their faces, and she is being reunited with them. now. So really incredible news. And Shosh, you know, you made an incredible point about the braids. You know, we've seen this throughout. We've seen, you know, the hostages coming out with braids in their hair. And it was revealed that it was Agam Berger. She was the one that was braiding all of these girls' hair as they were coming out. So really an incredible story. So Shosh and Ariella, now she's being reunited with her family, and then she's going to be transferred over to Beilinson Hospital. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, so Ariella has been the one reporting on the hospitals, what steps. Of course, we know the first step is, like you said, they're at Reim for initial checkups where they'll likely change their clothes. That's where Agam is reuniting with her family right now. Gadi, Arbel will follow lead. They'll also be at Reim. But what can you tell us about the hospitals? Which ones will they be going to?
Well, so Agam will be going to Beilinson, where the other 4 female soldiers were transferred, and there she'll be reunited with her extended family members, her siblings, and also the 4 female soldiers, where they will welcome her. I mean, we have no idea the condition of the hostages coming out. You know, each one is a surprise. The hospitals are expecting any scenario, they're preparing for any scenario. But the main thing, first and foremost, is to give them the space and privacy which they will have in the hospitals to be surrounded by their loved ones, and receive not only the medical attention support they need, but also the psychological support they need. You know, trauma is one of the most obvious things that each hostage will be coming out with. So this time now, these next few days and weeks is a crucial time for the hostages to be around their loved ones.
Absolutely. And let's just talk about the age of Gadi Moses. 80 years old. He turned 80 years old in Hamas captivity. To survive 480 days of that, we know that there's also another hostage in captivity, Shlomo Mansour, who's 87 years old, who's still a hostage. He is named on this 33-person list that is set to come out in this phase 1 of this deal. But to think that there are elderly people they could be walking out, it's an unbelievable moment. It's a historic moment to see that people of that age can survive atrocious things on October 7th. Remember, these people haven't even been able to mourn October 7th. They still don't understand the magnitude of what happened on October 7th. To now come out of 480 days, to go through what happened on October 7th and their survival of captivity is something that the human brain, really, we can't even understand, and we probably will never be able to understand.
Definitely. But it's also what you said, you know, his age is extremely alarming. All elderly people often need medications they take every day, extra care. The propaganda video was released of him whilst he's been in captivity, and he looked noticeably frail and weak. So we've seen a video today of him reuniting with Arbel before their release, and you know, it was good to see him standing on his 2 feet, hugging her, smiling. No doubt it's a huge relief, something we can't put into words what they must be feeling. But there are definitely grave medical concerns for all hostages, especially those in 80s, 90s.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, Ariella and Shosh, thank you, and we'll return to you later. You know, right now we know that Agam Berger is reuniting with her parents after 482 days in Hamas captivity. Let's take a closer look at Agam's story, the last of the IDF observers to be released.
20-year-old Agam Berger is the last living female hostage in Hamas captivity. She was kidnapped from Nahalol's army base on October 7th alongside 4 other female soldiers. Their brutal abduction was caught on camera as video showed Agam seen with blood coming from her mouth, arms zip-tied around her back while being led into a car, all while in her pajamas. She last spoke with her father, Shlomi, while the base was under fire from terrorists before they reached her. She arrived at the base only 2 days before the massacre. The emotional release of Berger marks the end of the final female soldier coming home after she was separated last week from the 4 soldiers she was held with because they were released. Daniela Gilboa, Nama Levy, Liri Albag, and Karina Ariev all walked out of Gaza alive, leaving behind Berger. She braided their hair before they were released. Agam is from the central city of Holon. She has a twin sister and 2 younger brothers. She's an accomplished violinist that spent time volunteering with at-risk youth. Testimonies from released hostages say Berger kept Shabbat while in captivity and even started making blessings over food and refusing to cook on the Sabbath. Her family also started to keep Shabbat and their traditions once Berger was taken on October 7th.
Absolutely. So we're waiting for the visuals of the reunion, and we're waiting, of course, to see Gadi Moses and Arbelia Yehud being transferred over to the Red Cross. And, you know, as we wait, I also want to discuss the Thai hostages that are being released today.
I just thought a word about Agam Berger to add on to what we just heard.
Yeah,
Apparently, she also refused to eat meat provided by Hamas during her captivity because it wasn't kosher. And that's why some people are saying she's particularly pale. And I just want a final word about the Tatzpaniyot. Of course, there have been stories that they did give intelligent warnings. They heard things in Gaza and passed on their concerns up the chain of command in the security establishment. And of course, this hasn't been thoroughly investigated. So I just want to say this is based on some reports, and whether their concerns were basically dismissed. This has been a matter of debate about it. And also, clearly, the security arrangements that were put in place to protect these young women sitting right on the Gaza border were insufficient. And of course, that has led a lot of the parents to say the security establishment in particular should have a responsibility to bringing these young women home. They were put in the line of fire with insufficient protection. So you could just imagine how, and maybe Amit could speak about this, the obligation the security establishment felt to getting them back home, and how relieved they must be today. About the Thai hostages, this is a story that's almost been underreported, certainly in Israel and internationally. And it says two things. One, the concern, part of this was because those governments, the Thai government, did not want to see this too much publicized. They were trying to conduct their own negotiations with Hamas, were not successful, or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But it also speaks to, I think, the random cruelty of Hamas, PIJ, the terrorists there, that they would kidnap these Thai hostages. There was no reason for it. They would just happen to be there working in the kibbutzim at the time. And as I said, kidnapping them, treating them cruelty. It's just a kind of a meaningless, random sadism, I would say, demonstrated certainly by the terror groups that took them hostage.
Absolutely. I think we need to remind our viewers that on October 7th, Hamas did not just kidnap, did not just murder Israelis, but they also took nationals of dozens of other countries, many of who are still being held captive in Gaza. There were, I believe, 31 Thai hostages taken into Gaza. Some were already released back in November. But, you know, Amit, I want to ask you, why did Hamas decide to release these hostages today? Because they weren't part of the deal, of the Phase 1 deal.
I think they are not considered as an Israelis. Then they have no price. That's why we are not dealing of releasing terrorists instead of releasing Thai people. They priceless for us because they are human beings and they worked for us and they lived with us. It's the same as our hostages, the Israelis. The Thai hostages is like our brothers, of course. But for the Hamas, they have no price. They can release them yesterday. But they are dealing with it until the last moment, as much as they can take from that, because they need also the numbers. The numbers of hostages that they are holding, it's part of it. So they are not releasing them till today. I hope they will do it today, but we will not pay a price for them in the hostages deal.
Absolutely. Now, we've received word that U.S. President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, is arriving at Beilinson Hospital in order to meet with the hostages and awaiting the arrival of Agam Berger. He's been in Israel. He was in Saudi Arabia. He arrived in Israel. He met at length with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday. He also visited the Netzarim corridor in Gaza yesterday. Caleb, what can you tell us about his visit here? I mean, what's on the agenda?
Yeah, first of all, let's take note. Steve Witkoff has emerged as the most significant figure in the Trump administration when it comes to dealing not only just with the hostages issue, but I think in general with Israel. Of course, we do not yet have the new U.S. ambassador, Mike Huckabee, because he hasn't been confirmed by the Senate. Marco Rubio has just been confirmed, the Secretary of State. He's involved in different things. So Steve Witkoff has emerged as the key figure. In some ways, I would say, at least until now, kind of as the equivalent that Jared Kushner was in terms of the first Trump administration. He met yesterday with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Reports have come that they did begin to discuss what I said before, phase two, the governance of Gaza, doing it. We also learned, though, he did particularly stress to the Prime Minister that he wants to see, the Trump administration wants to see a full hostage release. They want to see phase one and then phase two be completed. And remember, phase two is going to be very problematic politically for Prime Minister Netanyahu. Bezalel Smotrich, the Minister of Finance, says he will pull out of his party, said in 42 days if Israel doesn't resume, go back to war. And that would that would go into the phase two, and we wouldn't see the release of all the hostages. So Prime Minister Netanyahu under tremendous political pressure, but Steve Witkoff saying the Trump administration does want to see the full hostage release. On the other hand, Witkoff also giving, I would say, in a way, some support to Prime Minister Netanyahu, again, in bringing up this issue. And apparently Steve Witkoff did again bring up this issue of transferring Palestinian civilians out of the Gaza Strip, either to Egypt and Jordan or to even some other locations, some other countries.
Albania.
Albania was named, Malaysia, I mean, it all sounds unlikely. But again, that could be seen in some degree as helping Prime Minister Netanyahu, in a sense, mollifying for Bezalel Smotrich, maybe encouraging to keep in the government a bit longer as the process plays out. So again, huge meeting next week between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Donald Trump in Washington. Yeah. And that's when really maybe we're going to start hearing some concrete details about how that governance of Gaza may emerge.
And Amit, I want to ask you, Caleb saying that, U.S. President Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff are adamant about trying to get this hostage deal through all three phases. But the Israeli security establishment is insisting that Israel needs to resume the fighting once this deal is over. So,
Yeah, it's not getting together.
Yeah.
And of course, the strategic of Trump is to stop the war, not to resume the war. And that's why we have some argument with Trump in that way. I think that will be on the table this week when Benjamin Netanyahu will meet Trump. It will bring it up very specific. Because the other stages of this hostage deal is leading us to the place that Hamas will live on the table, on the place of Palestinian area, and we can't live with it. So this will be the main issue, I think, between Trump and Netanyahu when they are talking about the day after. Strategically, we will have to think who is going to rule Gaza Strip, and it won't be the Hamas.
And it won't be Hamas. Absolutely. And we are now continuing to wait for the visuals of the Red Cross arriving at the location chosen by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas to transfer Gadi Moses, the first male civilian to be released, and Arbel Yehud, the female civilian who is still in Gaza. She was supposed to be released ahead of the IDF observers. Hamas breached the deal, and this is why we are seeing an extra release of hostages today. So we're waiting to see these images. We're seeing the mobs on the screen. I think the visuals you're seeing are the mobs of Palestinians, again, waiting for these hostages to be transferred over.
Right. There was concern that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad would drag this process out. Some people even concerned it might even take hours, go into the evening, and just think of someone like Gadi Moses having to experience this. Hopefully, it won't be too long, because this is just extra cruelty added onto cruelty in terms of those two hostages down there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we are now awaiting their transfer, which we hope will take place. And in the meantime, Arbel Yehoud, the female civilian, she's been held by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, not by Hamas. She's finally being released today. Let's take a look at her story.
The dispute over the release of hostage Arbel Yehoud has now led to the release of 6 hostages this week. When 4 female IDF soldiers were released last Saturday, Israel said Hamas violated the ceasefire agreement by releasing soldiers before civilians, as hostage Arbel Yehoud had still not yet been released. It was determined that the 29-year-old was being held by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another terrorist organization in Gaza. PIJ falsely classified Yehoud as a soldier when she was a civilian. Yehoud was kidnapped with her boyfriend Ariel Cunyo from her home on Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. Her brother was also presumed a hostage, but it was determined he was murdered that day after his remains were found in June and was declared dead. After Israel's dispute with Hamas over her release, PIJ produced a propaganda video, proof of life video of Yehoud this week, where she said she hopes to return home, quote, like the other girls. Yehoud's family has lived on Kibbutz Nir Oz for 3 generations. She works at the Center for Technology, Science, and Space at the Eshkol Regional Council and has a deep love for people and nature. Her family says she is a devoted aunt who is always the aunt to come play and take care of her nephews around the kibbutz.
Absolutely. So that is Arbel Yehoud's story, being held for 482 days by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And I think now we're going back to Shosh and Ariella at Hostages Square, anticipating the release of Arbel Yehoud and Gadi Moses. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so like you said before, both of these hostages have been in Palestinian Islamic Jihad. For people who don't know what that is another terrorist organization in Gaza that operates separately from Hamas, which is confusing. They both attacked that day, in addition to civilians on October 7th, taking people hostage. Both of these hostages from Kibbutz Nir Oz. They're from the same kibbutz. A kibbutz for Arbel has been in her family for generations. For Gadi Moses, he's been there for years as well. Gadi Moses, his partner Efrat, was murdered on October 7th. His ex-wife Margalit was kidnapped. In addition to Efrat's grandchildren and her daughter, the 4 of them were released back in November of 2023. Gadi, 80 years old, like we said, one of the oldest hostages in Hamas captivity, is set to walk out hopefully on his 2 feet. Arbel, there's been dispute over Arbel. Why wasn't she released earlier? She was released after the soldiers. The ceasefire deal read, according to Israel, is that the soldiers were to be released after all female and children hostages. Of course, we know that Arbel was later found out to be held by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There's one family that everyone keeps talking about, of course, is the Bibas family. This is a family that the whole world has their eyes on. You have the 2 youngest children in Hamas captivity, Kafir, Ariel, you have their mother Shiri, you have their father Yarden, an entire family still in Hamas captivity. What can you tell us about them, what this family means to the diaspora, means to the world of people watching this conflict still unfold?
Right, I mean, of course, we had the hostage releases in November 2023, and then we saw most of the children come out, and Ariel and Kafir Bibas are still in captivity, their mother Shiri as well, and Yarden. A hostage video has been released of Yarden since he's been in captivity, and he's also expected to be released in this deal, but there seems to be no firm or positive word, really, or signal of any sort of sign of life from Shiri or the 2 children. And of course, the first, in this phase, the first hostages meant to be released were women and children. So why Shiri and these 2 children are not, we're not seeing them. We're not seeing them being listed in today's release, Saturday's release. It leaves many question marks, but it goes back to what you said. Not all hostages are being held by Hamas, and that causes many problems because Hamas has stated they don't know where all the hostages even are. So knowing the condition of each of them is almost impossible when we have no clue who they're being held by, who their captors are, and it makes it all the more complicated. But it's absolutely terrifying to know that there are two very small children in Hamas captivity.
And we know that Israel asked and said to Hamas yesterday, we need a status report of the Bibas children, Shiri Yarden. Where are they? What are their conditions? We know on Saturday, the IDF spokesperson did say there is grave concern about the Bibas family. As like you said, there's been no update on them. And this is a story about the Bibas family that truly has captivated the world. You have these two little children that were seen on video from October 7th in their mother's arms, two red-headed children, as they were being swept away to Gaza by these terrorists. It is a story that so many people can relate to, young families can relate to, parents, grandparents, and everyone else. It is a story that's complex, and we're still waiting for updates. Lidar?
Yes, and right now we are seeing the Red Cross arrive at the location in Khan Yunis where Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud are set to be transferred. So we are going to be seeing these visuals. And in the meantime, you know, the parents of Agam Berger have released a statement after meeting with her. It's in Hebrew, so I'll translate for our viewers. They say, "Thank God that we've arrived at this moment, and our brave Agam has returned to us after 482 days in the hands of the enemy." They say that their daughter is strong. She believes. She is brave, and they thank all the Israel security forces for bringing her back, for their support. And they say that now they and Agam will be able to start the process of sort of her rehabilitation, and they note that the rehabilitation process will not be able to be completed until all the hostages are returned home. So that is a message that Agam's family, her parents, have put out after being reunited with her. And now we're seeing the Red Cross arriving at Khan Yunis, outside of Sinwar's home. You know, they've chosen a place of, you know, great symbolism. Caleb, what do you have to say about that?
It's a big show. I mean, listen, the killing of Yahya Sinwar was a major, major blow against Hamas, at least in terms of the morale, maybe the most important during this thing. And this is an attempt by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad to try to, in a sense, claim some degree of victory in the face of Sinwar's death. So again, it's terrible and I think cruel to put these two hostages, especially Gadi Moses, through this at this stage. A word about the Bibas family. I'm not going to speculate specifically on their condition, but the fact is, it is in the interest of Hamas to release those hostages who are in the best condition first, because that does encourage Israel to keep going with phase one, with the hostages. It makes perhaps slightly lessens the pain of releasing those Palestinian security prisoners if Israel sees it's getting back these healthy hostages. As we go along, we're going to start getting in the situation. We know, of course, that a little less than half of the hostages, according to the report given, are not alive. We don't even know the condition of some of the remaining ones who are alive. So Israelis are going to have to steel themselves in the coming days, that we may not see these kind of wonderful pictures that we've seen today and earlier about hostages being in good condition and in good spirit. I think Israelis have to prepare themselves for what we may see in the coming days.
Absolutely. Yes, Amit, you wanted to say?
Yes, of course. Two things about, first, the place that we see that Jihad Islamic and the Hamas are placing the exchange of the hostages is a symbol. It's a symbol for them. Yahya Sinwar is a hero. They want him to be their hero for the victory. So this is one of the symbols of the Palestinian Jihad Islamic and Hamas to this victory. For what Caleb said about Bibas' family, of course that all the signs are showing us that something is wrong with their condition. But still, we have to be optimistic because all the way Hamas was playing with our emotions, giving us signs like the hostages are dead, and then we saw that they are alive. Maybe they are playing again with this family, this tragedy for us. Of course, it's something that Hamas is using, and let's hope that this is kind of a game for them, and we will see them in better condition that we think now that they are.
Absolutely. You know, Danielle Gilboa, who was released last week in November, Hamas had said that she was murdered, and
yeah, they are showing signs like that tattoo on the hand, and we have a lot of examples like that the Hamas wants to play with our emotions. And I want to be optimistic that maybe we will see them in other conditions that we think today.
And I think, as Caleb noted, you know, we're very happy to see the release of these 3 hostages and, of course, the Thai nationals. But let's not forget those that are still behind. There are still 82, I believe, hostages still being held in captivity. And so the Bibas family, of course, among them, they've become sort of a symbol of the hostages, these 2 red-headed boys.
By the way, I do, and it's staying on, I'll just add to kind of what Amit said. You could say, well, why didn't we see sort of proof of life video? Because Hamas knew, and they're very shrewd in their propaganda. They knew that if they would put out video of those young children being held prisoner, the world would turn against them and be reviled by that.
But this is
it was in their interest, their propaganda interest, not to show those images of these babies, these infants in captivity.
They can use them. They can use them as something that is more priceless for us than other hostages. Then maybe for the other stages, they will flag them as something that they have, and we have to rule as they are telling us to do in this hostages.
And indeed, in terms of the prisoner releases, there are some high-profile prisoners whose release has been debated,
they will ask for them,
such as Marwan Barghouti. I mean, it could be a scenario where they specifically ask for example, the release of a specific Palestinian prisoner in return for a specific hostage. We can't rule out that as a tactic, Amit. Yeah.
Right. So I do want to just point out for our viewers that according to the agreement, according to this ceasefire hostages deal that was negotiated, all of the female civilians and the children were supposed to come out first, followed by the female IDF soldiers, and then the elderly and those in poor medical condition. Now, the Bibas family have not been released. They weren't released back in November either during the first hostage deal, which saw the release of women and children. Now, the IDF has expressed grave concerns over their well-being, but we simply don't know their status. And Israel has placed pressure now, has gotten word to Hamas through mediators that they are demanding Hamas reveal the condition of the Bibas family. And of course, beyond that, we don't really know much. And of course, the family has asked that the media refrain from speculating. So of course, we're not going to speculate on their condition. And now we have joining us on Zoom, we're going to find out in just a second. We have Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Avital Leibovich, who's the director of AJC Jerusalem and the former IDF spokesperson. Avital, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
You know, your first thoughts of seeing the visuals that we're seeing Agam be released. First thoughts on that.
Yeah, you know, we have the tendency to focus on us, on the Israelis, which are glued to the TV screens since early morning. And of course, this is the case. But I do want to point out and zoom out a little bit to our Jewish communities all over the world, because my colleagues in America and in Europe, in the Jewish communities there, are just in the same situation. They're holding their breath. watching every single screenshot indicating the return of the hostages. They also know many of them by names. You know, the hostages' families traveled often across the Israeli borders to the rest of the world. And many of the Jewish communities, including AJC, actually organized meetings for the families with legislators, with congressmen, with senators, with other officials, so they could really tell the story, because their story at the end of the day is the story of Israel. So I do want to just highlight for a second this connection, which I believe is critical to understand, you know, the bond that we have between us. And of course, watching the pictures, like everyone else, I was deeply emotional. I have kids in the army as well. So obviously, as a parent, this is something that always crosses your mind. But at the other side, I'm looking at the staging of Hamas. And this is something that I would call the theater of terror. You know, Hamas deliberately placing people on the stage with specific guns in order to indicate that these are guns they took from Israeli soldiers. And of course, the entire uniform, the mock uniform, and all of that around the staging of the entire scenery, which, by the way, I think actually does better PR for Israel than for Hamas. So obviously, this is something that it's important to communicate. And last, I would say about the PR context is that, you know, the screens all over TV stations in the world are cut and split into two. On the one hand, it's images of the hostages, and on the other side of the screen, we see the prisoners who are...
Avital, I want to stop you for just one moment, because what we're getting now, we're getting visuals of the Red Cross. I think we saw a very brief glimpse of Arbel Yehud sitting in the car. So we're seeing that now, of course, surrounded, as you said, by Hamas on their pickup trucks, in their full military gear with guns surrounding them. These are images of Hamas, maybe of a Gamburger. These are images that we're seeing from earlier from Agam's release. So who we saw in the car was Agam Berger. This is the moment of transfer when she was put into the Red Cross vehicle. And of course, now we know that she's back in Israel, back and reunited with her family. So Avital, I want to turn back to you. You know, you talked a little bit, you started talking about the international response to the hostage releases. What have been the reactions internationally? You started talking about that, so maybe you can continue.
Yeah, I gave a lot of interviews, and therefore I can tell you that actually what I've been seeing is a very massive coverage of the return of the hostages. In other words, what we think is an internal Israeli issue is not really, does get a lot of international attention, which is maybe an indication of you know, how much spotlight Israel is receiving. I think, again, imagine a screen which is split. On the one side, there are prisoners with blood on their hands, murderers that have been released, and then there is the equivalent, so-called, to the hostages, which are civilians, except a few soldiers that have been released as well. And this is something that we must explain here in Israel to the world, that this is not a normal equivalence. Terrorists versus civilians who were kidnapped from their beds in the middle of the morning. And this is a challenge for Israel advocacy, but we must, of course, continue and explain and give the footage, give the images, talk about the terrorist who exploded, who sent his cousin, you know, he sent his 29-year-old cousin to explode in 2003 in Maxim restaurants with an explosive belt, murdering 21 Israelis and injuring 51 others. So we need to give the numbers, the facts, the figures. We need to show the name, and we need to speak about it.
Absolutely. And, you know, I do want to also point out on October 7th, you know, we've said this throughout the broadcast, that Hamas didn't only kidnap Israeli civilians, they kidnapped civilians, nationals from countries from all over the world. So I want to ask, you know, where are these countries? Where have they been this entire time since October 7th? How have they not been pressuring Hamas to release their nationals, to release their citizens?
So I think the answer will be given today. The fact that five hostages with Thai nationality will be released today gives you the exact indication of the negotiations that took place behind the scenes. Not everybody, not in every culture, you go automatically to the public sphere in terms of negotiations and meetings and media headlines and so on. Israel is a very vibrant democracy, as we all know, and therefore a lot of the families are vocal. We know them, we know their stories, we know the stories of their kids, of their grandparents, of their uncles, of their aunts. We know it personally because they're so vocal, but this is not the same in many countries, African countries, Asian countries. It is different with the American families who time and time again were invited to the White House in order to meet officials and showcase their story and ask again for the involvement of the American administration in the release of the hostages, which, as we know, eventually took place and all along the last year and 4 months. So it really varies on cultures and countries.
All right, Avital, I'm going to go back to our visuals here now because we're seeing on the screen, I think we're seeing the Red Cross arriving at the square where they're set to receive Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud after 482 days in captivity. And so, Avital, thank you so much for speaking with us and for your insights today.
Thank you.
All right, Kalev, so taking a look at these, I mean, you just see the cars surrounded by Palestinian mobs. I mean, what comes to mind as you're seeing these visuals?
I really, again, this echoes what we saw during the first releases, and what comes to mind, well, for me, immediately, my sympathies to those two hostages that Arbel and Gadi Moses that have to go through this, the gauntlet. How concerning that must be. And yes, and also the issue of what Amit said is that obviously much work has to be done. We know the military capability of these groups, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, has been severely degraded, and we shouldn't downplay the success that the IDF and the security establishment has in that role. But so much more has to be done in basically to demilitarize the Gaza Strip. I mean, there is simply no way that we can move to a so-called phase 3 end of conflict unless there is a complete demilitarization. That means taking the guns away. Every one of those guns that we're seeing in this footage has to be taken away. And if that is not going to happen at some point, and there's not going to be agreement by the Palestinians, it's impossible to imagine that we're actually going to an end of conflict. And I'll repeat what I said earlier. It could be that President Trump, even though practically it's hard to imagine that they would be able to transfer the Gaza population out of Gaza, is something of a threat to the Palestinians. If you want to stay in Gaza, you're going to have to agree to terms that you were never willing to agree to.
Absolutely. And I think what we're seeing now is the arrival of Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud. We see a car with armed Hamas guards walking beside it. There's a lot of people, a lot of commotion in the square in Khan Yunis. Amit, what are your thoughts?
I want to remark about the event. We see that it's less ordered than what we saw in the north.
Yeah.
That because, of course, it's part of it is Jihad Islamic and part of it is Hamas. Maybe they can't coordinate themselves too much. There's no stage. There's no flags. The show is not so good as they want to be, and it's not ordered than we're used to. Maybe, of course, the location is not good for them. They are hiding. A lot of people are not armed. Very few are Hamas members, as we can see on the heads, and the few of them, of course, is the flags and the Jihad Islamic. We see that they are not controlling the public, they are not controlling very good the event, and this is the difference between Jihad Islamic holding and the Hamas. Of course, we are not surprised that this is the difference now.
Yeah, I mean, really chaotic scenes. Yes, Caleb, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I actually want to go back a little bit to one point Avital Leibovich said about how different countries have reacted to their citizens being taken hostage. Take a look at Russia. There is still a Russian citizen, a Russian Israeli who is a Russian national citizenship, Alexander Sasha Trufanov, who is being held in Gaza. There was speculation about that he might be one of the first, or even men released. We haven't seen that yet. Russia has called for his release, but not only does it appear that they haven't done much to get him back, the Russian government even hosted top Hamas officials in Moscow, officially hosted them while this young man was being held captive by Hamas. So clearly the way Israel relates to its civilians and soldiers being held hostage are somewhat different from some other nations.
Yeah. And now we see, I think, that they are about to be taken out of the car that they're being held in. Really chaotic scenes, as you both have said. You know, not the very sort of organized show that Hamas has been putting on the past couple weeks. And here we see them surrounding the car, people climbing up on very chaotic scenes.
Yeah, I think that as we know, there is a lot of honor issue between the Hamas and Jihad Islamic. And even if Hamas is not holding these hostages, they want to be seen as they are handling and managing all this event. And Jihad Islamic, of course, will think that they want to be in the front. And I hope that will not be any kind of reaction between them because it can hurt our hostages.
Absolutely. So we're seeing the scenes unfolding right now. And I want to welcome in to the studio as well Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserve Jonathan Conricus, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and the former IDF spokesperson. So, Jonathan, we're seeing these visuals now. I just want to hear your quick thoughts, you know, as you're watching these visuals, as you're watching this exchange about to take place. You know, what's going through your mind?
Well, I'll start from the top, from the strategic part, not the emotional part. The emotional part is easier, I think. Happy to see hostages home or on their way and hoping that they are well and healthy. But on the strategic level, I think we're seeing a deal being put in place, the parts of the deal that I think were easier to facilitate. What's happening now, the current days, is that negotiations are underway in Doha and to a certain extent in Cairo, where the next stage, and that's really where the fork in the road will be. When these images will be completed and finally when we'll see this batch and the next batch of Israeli hostages home, then we will, the world will focus on where do we go next. Will Hamas continue and release the remaining 65 men, or will we come to a situation where Hamas refuses and Israel will be faced with an option of what do we do now? That's the big strategic picture. If we, elevate above these choreographed scenes sent directly on Al Jazeera and probably managed by Al Jazeera behind the scenes as well, then really what is at play is a situation of the future here. Now, regarding the events themselves, of course, looking forward to seeing Israeli hostages home. Very happy for the families. I think I can't imagine how excited and relieved they will be once they'll know that first they will be in Israeli hands and then they'll be able to see, touch, feel, and hug them. And that is amazing. And we have waited very, very long for that to happen. On the strategic level, though, I hate to say it, the picture in Gaza is not a good one. On the strategic level, when we take stock of the military situation, the political, the diplomatic situation, this isn't the outcome that we fought 15 months for. It is short of that. There still is tremendous work to be done in Gaza. And I think it's important to emphasize that there should be a unity of interest here and a unity of effort. Those in the world who prioritize the well-being of Palestinians and those in the world who prioritize Jews and Israel, we have the same aim here. We should have the same aim, and that is to get rid of Hamas. As long as Hamas is in power, that means that the Gaza Strip will not be rebuilt. That means that we will have continued fighting, bloodshed, terror, and violence. And it means that we have unfinished business. So whoever wants to do good by Palestinians should help Israel get rid of Hamas. And of course, anybody who supports freedom, democracy, human rights, and decency should help Israel get rid of Hamas. And I hope that now we will see different US policies that will allow Israel, once we get all of our hostages home, to really do what Israel needs to do, and that is to get rid of Hamas.
Absolutely. And I do want to get into the strategic aspect of this with you in just a moment. But I wanted to point out something very striking that jumped out at me now on the screen as we're seeing these visuals. A lot of children, a lot of young boys running around in this sort of chaotic scene, trying to get a glimpse of the hostages. I mean, what do you make of this?
Well, I think that it's interesting to see the different events, whether the ones that are controlled solely by Hamas, which seem better choreographed, more scripted. From the first to the second and the third event, we see how much attention they pay to details and how important it is for Hamas to portray an image of victory, of power, of control, of order. And they're, of course, leveraging the setting. And for people who've been watching Al Jazeera live, it's of course, a totally different picture of their ability of steadfastness and their victory. The messaging out of Jabalia, where the first release was today, is of course one out of victory. This is our stronghold. This is where we stood and fought against the Israelis. And of course, I don't think that that location was by chance. They chose Jabalia as an area where there was severe fighting, where sadly many Israeli soldiers were killed. And that's of course the message that Hamas wants to bring forward. So on a Hamas level, very choreographed, attention to detail. This, I'm guessing, maybe is Islamic Jihad, even though I see a green flag, but this may be an Islamic Jihad facility and location, and as such, less choreographed, maybe less input of Al Jazeera behind the scenes. But and you can see that there's less crowd control and appears to be much more dynamic and less managed situation. It could be because that is not the level of control of Hamas in this specific location is less. That's speculation at this stage. But what I would focus on is, this is the best show in town. This is what Hamas has to offer the people. They're amidst ruins. Gaza is destroyed. So is many parts of Khan Yunis and Rafah. The central part of Gaza is a little bit in better condition. But in terms of distractions, this is as good as it gets for Hamas. When this is over, in just a moment, Caleb, when this is over, then people will go back to the ruins that used to be their houses, and they'll have no water, no sewage, very little food, and they'll be asking questions of Hamas. So what Hamas is doing is trying to milk the most that they can out of this event, boost morale, boost control. And it's interesting, and I've reflected on this, and it's been said by others, to see so many armed Palestinian terrorists out in the streets in uniform, which is something that we didn't see for 15 months. They were in hiding, in tunnels, hiding underneath their civilians, and they were not in uniform. Even when they emerged above ground and fought briefly, they were in civilian clothing, and they died in civilian clothing. They're out in uniforms now with their bandanas and full combat gear. I hope that when we come back to fighting, they'll stay in uniform to make it easier for us to identify them and then to make sure that they're counted as terrorists and not as civilians.
So you made a very interesting point about the when we return to fighting, and I do want to get back to you on that in a minute. But Kayla, if you wanted to say something, you wanted to comment on
yeah,
these
about
things.
what you said about children. Look, we know that children in Gaza are male children certainly indoctrinated at a very young age towards terrorism, towards hatred of Israel, towards hatred of Jews. We've all seen those photos of basically almost infants, perhaps, wearing mock suicide belts and bandanas, indicating that they're to be martyrs. We've seen the footage of the reports about the Gaza summer camps in which they're basically, little kids are being trained to be terrorists. And one other point relating also maybe a little about to what the changes in Gaza. We should note another event happening today, which is the Israeli government enforcing the closure of UNRWA offices on Israeli territory, the UN Relief Works Agency that is supposed to just provide aid to the Palestinians, but it also runs an educational system that has been, of course, there are the more egregious examples of Hamas militants belonging to UNRWA, being employed by them, hiding weapons in UNRWA schools and facilities. But beyond that is the infiltration of this ideology, Hamas ideology, into the educational school system in Gaza. So it's not about just simply defeating Hamas militarily, which has to be done. But the changeover in Gaza also has to come totally from the ground up. Almost, I would say, almost in a sense, almost like equivalent to like the denazification of Germany after World War II, which is changing the way the education system, the social system, so that children, you know, we won't see those images of little children being part of this effort to basically create a terror nation.
Absolutely. Denazification, I think, is the word that came to my mind as well. And now, you know, we're seeing these images. I mean, the car can barely make it through the crowds, really chaotic scenes. Palestinians, mostly men, some armed in full military gear. As Jonathan, as you pointed out, we see the Hamas flags a little bit in there, but really chaotic scenes. And you can only imagine what is going through the minds of Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud as they're being driven into these mobs surrounding them. So really chaotic, terrifying scenes for them. Let's hope that the release goes as planned and they're able to be transferred to the Red Cross and then into the hands of the IDF. And we should hopefully be seeing that soon. Now, Jonathan, I do want to come back to the point that you made about the return to fighting, because that does seem like the security establishment here in Israel is very adamant about the fact that Israel needs to go back in to finish the job, to eliminate Hamas once the hostages are out. Yet on the other side, we're seeing the Trump administration very adamant about going through phase 2 and phase 3, which would call for the permanent end of the war. So how do you sort of, you know, there's dissonance here. Yeah. How do you square that?
So, and to add to that complexity is the upcoming meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the insinuations we're getting is that that will deal with a broader aspect of the Middle East, possible normalization with Saudi, and that of course adds another tremendous weight on the side of the scales for a long-term ceasefire with Gaza. Now, that'll be a dilemma for Israel, because if on one hand we can get that super important expansion of the very positive Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia, that carries significant strategic weight, where on the other hand, if we have to pay a price here and make a sacrifice in Gaza, maybe that's a consideration worth doing for Israel. It remains to be seen. But if we focus only on the Gaza Strip and our war against Hamas or their war against us, for me that's much more of a binary situation, less complex. It's either Hamas exists and we continue to fight. It'll be a hudna, a ceasefire, which Hamas will violate once they'll be strong enough, if they'll be able to replenish their weapons and regain their military capabilities. Or the other side of it, the binary part, is Hamas is destroyed, politically and militarily. They do not govern the Gaza Strip. They do not have a say in the future, the day after of the Gaza Strip. And as Kalev pointed out, very importantly, education. And I would add to that the mosques and the sermons and the tone and the content of the Friday preachings to people. Speaking about Saudi, by the way, one of the efforts that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman did early on when he started his reform in Saudi was to address the rampant extremism in Saudi mosques in Saudi Arabia. Not only what they were doing abroad, but in Saudi Arabia. And he understood that he cannot effect change in Saudi Arabia without first and foremost dealing with the clerics, the imams, and what they were preaching. That needs to happen in Gaza as well. The education system and the religious system, they are two centers of gravity that really indoctrinate towards hatred, anti-Semitism, violence, and extremism. And until Israel deals with that, then we will have a festering situation on our hands. So in my mind, it is, I think, the likelihood of us going back to fighting in Gaza is significant. The moment that Hamas stops handing over hostages will be the moment that we will have to decide. And then it'll be either maybe Israel can do what Israel did in the past iteration of the Abraham Accords, where Israel threatened to apply Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, and that was a very strong incentive for the Emirates to agree to the Abraham Accords. Maybe this time it'll be a total annihilation of Hamas and significant damage in Gaza. That will be the incentive for Saudi to say, okay, you know what, let's put that on hold and let's do normalization, and then we'll spare the Gaza Strip. That's a few weeks or months in the future, but I think that's really part of the picture.
Now, I mean, we're seeing really incredible scenes here out on the screen. The cars can't even make it through the mobs. This has, you know, the potential to turn into a very dangerous situation. As you've all pointed out, this is not the organized sort of PR show that Hamas has been able to put on in the past releases. These are really chaotic scenes that we're seeing here in Khan Yunis. Mobs of Palestinians. I mean, Amit, I want to hear your insights as well on what we're seeing on the screen right now.
Yeah, I think it's a problem. What we see now, it's uncontrolled, the mob around the cause of Jihad Islamic and Hamas. They are not controlling the area. They are trying to make some order, to make this exchange be seen as a show for them. It's a problem if the show will not go right. Again, I think that there is an argument between Hamas and Jihad Islamic because they need to be with an honor at the end of this game as they are playing as in a game. So I hope that everything will go right in the right timing, but it seems that they are not controlling not the mob and not what happens inside the place. We will see the exchange in few minutes. Maybe they will have the announcement to get out our hostages and to give them to the Red Cross members. But it seems like it's not controlled as we saw back in Jabalia. It's a big problem, and I hope nobody will make some kind of a mistake there, because it can be ended as something that we don't want to see. I want to add a word about education in Gaza Strip. When we are thinking about the day after, as spoken here, we have to change the attitude. We have to change the way of thinking. It starts in the education system. It can't be changed unless we will deal with education in the very early ages of kids. They have to live with the knowledge that Israelis have the right to be in this area. The legitimate of Israel in the area will have to be out of books and This is part of the things that we hope the Saudi and the Emirates will bring inside Gaza. This is our hope to the big change, but it will take time.
Right. I do want to add also, by the way, we should note that Israel's moves against UNRWA received pushback, not just from the international community generally, but from the Biden administration specifically. And the fact that Israel is moving ahead to execute this law that was passed, which will force UNRWA certainly to close its offices on Israeli territory, specifically in Jerusalem, is receiving no pushback from the Trump administration. That does give, people say, then what is Israel, what is it getting back from the Trump administration in terms of perhaps if there was pressure for Prime Minister Netanyahu to agree to his deal? A number of steps. First of all, for example, that Israel can go ahead and, for example, take the military action. The operation, for example, it's now taking in Judea, Samaria, specifically in Jenin, without pushback from the U.S. administration. Something like the closure of, or the steps being taken against UNRWA. The delivery of these powerful bombs that were held back by the Biden administration because they said they were concerned of their use in Gaza. So there are already significant steps the Trump administration has done, certainly to make Israel or the Prime Minister Netanyahu's path easier. At the same token, that does give the President Trump some leverage over Prime Minister Netanyahu going forward, but we'll have to see how that plays out in their meeting next week.
Absolutely. Now we're looking again at these scenes. We are waiting to see the release of Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehoud. Now I want to transfer to Shosh and Ariella at Hostages Square. You know, we're seeing very chaotic scenes at the pickup point. What is the atmosphere like now in Hostages Square as people are watching this?
Tense, to be honest. You know, we had a big wave of relief and excitement when we saw
Can you
that
hear?
coming out, but now everyone is standing still, watching the screen, waiting. We're seeing mobs surrounding the vehicles. It's terrifying scenes, and we just need, everyone here is waiting for that moment of relief when we hear that the two hostages are with the Red Cross and are in safe hands.
Yeah, of course, as we were saying, this is a moment for Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It's their time to show off, they feel. So they're trying to put this big show on, similar to Hamas. Like we've continued to say in our reporting, Hamas and PIJ are completely different terrorist organizations that operate inside of Gaza. They are now handing over Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehoud. We were saying before how complicated and how these hostages might be feeling, knowing that they're walking into this parade, this show that they're putting on. And we saw people, their legs hanging from the top of buildings, people swarmed around this, just trying to get their own look as to what's happening in this release. We're seeing right now in this video hundreds of people surrounding these vehicles.
And we've also heard from previous hostage releases that moment where they are being transferred through these mobs was terrifying. We've heard that, and we've also heard that hostages who have come out and are watching these moments are reliving that distress. They said they had no idea where they were going. Many of them believed they were on their way to public execution. So what we're seeing now is terrifying and has the potential to turn very dangerous. So as I said, the atmosphere here is tense. We are just waiting to hear that the two hostages are in safe hands.
Yeah, and going back to what you said just about what these hostages, what might be going through their mind at this moment when they see hundreds of people. Remember, these people have likely been isolated for a long time in captivity. To walk outside of wherever they were held, to see these hundreds of people watching, waiting for them, and then to be handed over, this is something they probably will never experience again. The trauma of all of this is just compounding. Here in Hostage Square, like you said, people are watching this screen, waiting. As you can see, Hamas actually sped up the timeline of when they would release Agam today. Now we are waiting for PIJ just to do their part. You know, it's unclear if this is on purpose, if they're having issues with what they want to portray in Gaza, and they're waiting for a certain moment. So we're continuing to follow all of this from Hostage Square. Lidar?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Jonathan, I want to turn back to you. You know, we've talked about this, the sort of comparison between the scene that we saw earlier today with Agam Berger's release, very organized, there was a stage, very clearly organized scene, and the scenes that we're seeing here. You mentioned that Al Jazeera also has a part in this, so can you maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think it's very telling, and soon maybe we'll be able to see a comparison between the two sites, and that'll be a visual representation of really the differences here. But what I think is super interesting, you know, we've been following this at FDD. We're researching it. We're monitoring Al Jazeera, their ties to different Palestinian terrorist organizations. Yeah, we can see this now, and if we get a zoom out, it'll be even better. But we've been following this for a while, and you know, the ties, the level, the intimacy, and the ties between this Qatari propaganda machine that masquerades as a news outlet and different Sunni terrorist organizations, it is just beyond belief. What I-24 exposed yesterday, Baruch Yadid, on the Hebrew channel, he exposed that there is a Gazan-born Palestinian journalist who is a senior journalist at Al Jazeera, who has been hired to choreograph and set the stage and do all of the messaging and the branding for Hamas of their hostage release ceremonies, the diplomas, the ceremonies, the stage, the preparation of speeches, all of the handouts to international media, and of course the live coverage, which, no surprise, goes first on Al Jazeera, and they are the ones who are dominant on the ground, have access to the best angles, and they are the ones who are setting really the frame here. And it really defies belief to see the intimacy and the strength of the ties between Qatar as a state across all of its institutional organs, Al Jazeera being really the foremost influence arm of the Qatari regime, and then different terrorist organizations, in this context Hamas. And we can see on the ground that this is probably a wise investment by Hamas, by having so-called professional choreography and having someone think of this from a media perspective. And you can see the difference here. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow or the day after, for the next releases, I think that there are additional Israeli hostages in the hands of Islamic Jihad. Maybe they will hire Al Jazeera as well. Maybe they will get professional help, and they'll get the good setup with the ceremony and the speeches, and they will find a suitable location, not just a private house amidst rubble where they're what we're seeing now on the right side of the screen, but really a setup. And this is really important because perceptions are very important, messaging is very important. We're now in the stage where kinetic operations are at the temporary cease, and it's really a battle of narratives. And from an Arab perspective, it's really important for Hamas to, as we said before, to signify that they won. They were able to stand. The steadfastness, sumud, is a very important part of Palestinian rhetoric and Hamas rhetoric, and they're choreographing that and they're messaging it using these ceremonies. And I think that's a super important picture. Last thing about Al Jazeera, you know, Kalev very correctly mentions UNRWA. That is one abomination that is now one step closer to being relegated and dismantled and not having a say in the future. And I hope that they will be dismantled totally in a organized and structured way, and that they'll cease to exist. Al Jazeera is another one. If we ask ourselves, what are the engines that are driving terrorism, racism, instability, and hatred across the Middle East, I would rank Al Jazeera right on the top of that. And every day that goes by and that network continues to spew its hatred is not a good day for freedom, for democracy, for civil rights. And it's only a very bad tool that promotes terrorism.
And, you know, we have to say Al Jazeera, of course, has been banned here in Israel, but it's also banned in other
many Arab countries.
And the Palestinian Authority.
And the Palestinian Authority itself recently banned Al Jazeera. This is clearly, and we should
close
say...
their offices and ban them.
And ban them, absolutely. And it's a Qatari...
Well, that's what I was going to say.
I mean, Caleb, that's really the mind-blowing part.
It's not Al Jazeera, it's Qatar. I mean, basically, it's an agent of Qatar, and it highlights the problematic role of Qatar. not just now, but of course
And
over
as
the
a
past,
mediator here.
right? As a mediator, and of course more than a decade and a half as a funder and supporter of Hamas, as giving shelter to Hamas, and you know there are we mentioned Steve Witkoff and the good work he's been doing. Some questions have been raised about the fact that he has had significant business interests in Qatar. There are some other members of the incoming Trump administration that have had some business connections
Well, we've
with
heard
Qatar.
him praising
Yes.
the Qatari.
Including the last statement.
Yeah.
Right, and and Qatar, of course, does have ties with the U.S. and you know plays a great double or multiple, triple game or multiple game, of course, giving support to U.S. military with its base there, but at the same time holding its ties with Iran. I mean, what could the answer be? I think one factor of this is it highlights perhaps the importance of getting Saudi Arabia fully in the picture when it comes to determining the future of the Gaza Strip, because the only regional power in terms of its influence and its resources that can challenge Qatar has been the Saudi Arabia, which has had, putting it mildly, severe issues with Qatar. They have a rivalry. And if Saudi Arabia can be brought into the process, especially into the process in determining perhaps the future of Gaza, this will be quite significant to provide a counterbalance to Qatar.
I just want to stop you because we're starting to see, I'm not sure if they're being released. We're seeing a lot of movement happening right now on screen. We're seeing sort of mobs, people with their cameras out. It's unclear right now.
It looks like there are
people walking
Islamic
through the
Jihad
crowd,
trying to pave a way, and there appears to be someone
Walking
moving in the center.
through.
Yeah, looks
Let's see
like
if
some
we
kind of movement.
Yeah, let's see if we can try and see the visuals, maybe the first visuals of Gadi Moses, of Albel Yehud. I mean, this must be absolutely terrifying for them. And of course, you know, this is anything can go wrong at this moment. And so we're really hoping that the transfer takes place, that they're able to get into the hands of the Red Cross, and then, of course, into the hands of the IDF onto Israeli soil.
Yeah, we don't see a Red Cross Jeep nearby, at least not in this close frame. Usually at the Hamas handovers, we've seen, you know, a very short distance being made in a more controlled environment. This looks quite chaotic. We can see the dust indicating a lot of movement, a lot of commotion there. It appears to be some kind of group of Palestinian Jihad operatives that are pushing their way through. I think we can get a glimpse here
I see
of
a
what...
thatch of white hair there on one of the people, which could be Gadi Moses. I should say, you mentioned the Red Cross. This highlights the impotence of the Red Cross in these kind of situations. The Red Cross should be involved in the very beginning of this process, should be with the hostages in dealing it, and this just reinforces the feeling that they have been basically been a taxi service in these,
exactly.
in this
And
process.
the Red Cross has been an Uber service. They have not visited a single hostage during the 482 days that they've been there.
Yeah, I've had...
Here, I think we can see pictures of Gadi Moses, Albel Yehud in the crowd. Is that them?
Very difficult to distinguish.
To tell.
Very. But I'd say a word about the Red Cross. I think that
It's hard to make out, yeah.
I think I've been in talks with a few people, both in their staff in the US and also people on the ground here. And I've leveraged this complaint at them. Why have you not been able to, why have you failed to get access to Israeli hostages, not seen them, not given them medical support and not done anything? And why have you only been relegated to doing this basic Uber service of hostages? In itself, that service is important, and it's good that at least that has been able to do. But I think that they acknowledge themselves that they have fallen short, and this is a significant shortcoming. What I've told them, and I think there's pretty much agreement, is that one of their biggest issues is that they're not communicating. We don't hear from the Red Cross. We don't hear them condemning in unequivocal, clear language. These are terrorist organizations, and the fact that they have not allowed us, the Red Cross, access to Israeli hostages is in blatant violation of everything that we stand for. Never mind, you know, legal terms, but really of decency. And one of the reasons why they claim not to be doing this is that they want to have open lines of communications, and they fear that if they say something of meaning against Hamas or Islamic Jihad, then they won't have access. To which I responded, well, you obviously don't have access anyhow. You haven't been able to get to the hostages. You have been absolutely meaningless when it comes to actually performing the services under your charter, and that is regrettable. And I hope that they will chart a different path in the future and actually be proactive. Here we see, I think, one of their vehicles.
So, I mean, we are seeing really, really chaotic,
I know, these are
violent scenes
disturbing.
Unfolding, very disturbing scenes. You know, Gadi Moses is 80 years old. He's been held, you know, in the dark tunnels of Gaza for 16 months. Coming out to such a scene, and we see people pushing and shoving. I mean, this is a very potentially dangerous situation for these hostages. Seems to be completely out of control. We can only hope that they're making their way. They're trying to make their way to the Red Cross vehicle, but we are just seeing scenes of mobs of Palestinians, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad doesn't seem to be able to control them.
Yeah, this is very disturbing, and I think this is something Israel and the mediators have to address. We see the hostage square there. You
see
can
the
just imagine
tension.
the
Look
tension,
at the
what they must be thinking, and the supporters of the families going through this kind of thing. This is something that really has to be
to hear that they're being released, to know that they should be on their way home, and then to see scenes like this it's really disturbing, really terrifying. And of course, we always say until they're not on Israeli soil, you know, they're not home. And you can really see the tension. You can feel the tension. You can see the tension in Hostages Square and here in the studio as well, I have to say. Amit, do you want to comment on this?
Another example of this culture of savages that can't control themselves, can't control even the difficulties between themselves to make something right. This is the kind of culture that we are facing. We are facing them. We saw that very clearly in the 7th of October, but now you can see that everybody is in there. It's not just the Hamas, it's not just the Islamic Jihad, it's the mob. It's the a Palestinian a culture of savages. They are not human beings. And you can see how they are dangerous. Our people, how they are dangerous. Now, our hostages, I hope everything will go well and they will go with no harm into the cars of the Red Cross. And I hope the Red Cross cars will move on and be able to get out of this area, because it's a very dangerous area now, very tense, not controlled, savages culture that we are living with them or near them, and we have to face it again and again.
Yeah. And what we're seeing here on the screen as well is the very first pictures of Agam Belger, who was transferred from the Red Cross to the IDF. These are the pictures that are coming out now of her transfer. And while Agam is safely back in Israeli hands, on Israeli soil, reunited with her family, what we're seeing now for Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud, very different scenes. This is a transfer being organized by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, not by Hamas and Al Jazeera. And so we're seeing really chaotic scenes, mobs of Palestinians really out of control here. We've seen them trying to make their way through the mobs, surrounded by Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas men in full military uniform with guns, but the scenes are very chaotic.
And then we can also think about the complexity of, once, hopefully, our two hostages will get in the vehicle of the Red Cross, they still have quite a long way to drive through Khan Yunis until
and
they
through
get
these mobs,
yes,
absolutely.
through these mobs and other mobs, and it'll be even probably it's more challenging and difficult to have crowd control on the way. And if we see this level of lack of security and control by the Islamic Jihad at the extraction point, then I fear that the road will be a bumpy ride as well.
Yeah, I remind you that it's not just two; it's seven
So
people
we're
that
getting
have to,
we're
right,
getting
also
news
the
that
5 of the Thai people.
Yeah, we're getting news that Albel has made it into the Red Cross vehicle.
Okay.
So she's inside the vehicle, from what we're hearing. We can't really make it out on the visuals because of this mob, this chaotic scene. But she is reportedly inside the vehicle. So at least in that regard, she is safe for now. And we're waiting to hear word on Gadi Moses, 80 years old. I mean, and Albel Yehud, who, according to Arab media reports, was held for pretty much most of her time in Gaza, held alone by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And if these scenes are any indication, we can only imagine the horrors that she's been through.
Right, and what a contrast to earlier the release of Agam Bergen. As I mentioned, there were objections raised over.
And what we're seeing, on the screen now, we can see the difference. You know, this is Agam's. It went very smoothly, very organized.
These are the pictures of already inside Israel.
Yeah, but even it was, but the transfer was done fairly quickly, and supposedly there was objections raised and raised with the meetings with Hamas about how the first transfer went, when also there were crowds around the vehicles, and it looked like Hamas tried to expedite the hostage handover today. Unfortunately, Palestinian Islamic Jihad is just, there was no reason these vehicles couldn't, for example, pull up in front of a building and just very quickly get the hostages back into the vehicle, making them walk through that crowd. As I said, as Amit said, is simply inhumane.
So we're hearing that Albel is in the vehicle, but Gadi Moses, we don't know where he is at the moment. It's unsure if he's made it into the vehicle or if he's somewhere in that mob of Palestinians. So there is some concern right now over his whereabouts, over his safety. These are really, really chaotic scenes. Again, showing just a glimpse of the, Amit, as you put it, sort of this savage, barbaric behavior towards Israelis.
You know, about that savagery, I think this has been lost on many around the world. You know, we've been speaking about, we've created this sometimes artificial distinction between Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the so-called Palestinian population, Palestinian civilians. And it's a distinction that, you know, it seems right in Western minds because there are fighters, and then there's women and children and elderly who are not fighters, and that's how Westerners think. That isn't entirely accurate, and in many places we've seen this militarization of Palestinian society, willingly going and on October 7 performing some of the most heinous crimes that we've seen. Rape, beheadings, murder, torching of houses, and of course looting, etc. More than 2,000 Palestinians crossed on October 7, fueled by rage, bloodlust, and hate for Jews. They understood that the gates were open, and they went in and they killed and murdered and raped. Then they went back, and on the 15 months of fighting, we have so many indications, so many testimonies of Palestinian civilians that have been part of Hamas's combat capabilities, either jailing Israeli hostages in civilian apartments where civilian families were the jailers of Israeli hostages, where they forced them to work in their households, where they kept them there out of, maybe they were paid by Hamas, or maybe they just did it for the sake of the so-called resistance. And we've seen the active use of schools and hospitals and mosques and everything civilian by Hamas and Islamic Jihad during the fighting, which again should, for people around the world, make people understand that, in fact, that distinction between military and non-military in Gaza isn't really there. It's something that's nice to speak about in Washington and European capitals, but on the ground in Gaza, that distinction doesn't exist. And according to the pictures that we see, we again see this bloodthirsty mob, that there's action, there's a show in town, and seems very violent, very primal. I wouldn't call them not human. They are human, but I would say that they are humans of a very disturbing kind, and I think that's important. That's an important point to make. Now, messaging-wise, Israel has struggled with this because official Israel has been saying our war isn't against the Palestinian people and our battle isn't against Palestinian civilians, which it isn't. But then when you think of it deeper, it actually is, because as long as they harbor support for Hamas, you want to...
Yeah, I just want to point out, before you finish your thought, we have the first visuals of Agam Berger reunited with her parents. I mean, really, really joyful photo, really happy to see her back at home here in Israel after 482 days in captivity. And we can only hope that Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses, we're seeing these chaotic scenes coming out of Khan Yunis of their transfer. So we can only hope that they will soon be able to share similar photos with their families. And Jonathan, I want to turn back to you so you can finish your thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, the pictures are beautiful, and that's what we want to see. We want to see our hostages back home in the hands of their loved ones, to start the long process of healing that will, of course, be needed, physical and probably mostly mental. And I'm again happy to see that she was walking on her own 2 feet and appears relatively okay, which is also similar to how many of the other hostages that we've seen in this round, how they have been released, which is lovely to see.
Right, at least one of the vehicles.
We're seeing one vehicle making its way. From what we understand, Arbel Yehud is inside that vehicle, and we are still waiting now to hear about Gadi Moses and also the 5 Thai nationals that are supposed to be released today. Jonathan, do you maybe want to comment as well about the 5 Thai nationals? Now, they're not a part of this first phase deal. They're not a part of this conflict. You know, and we've said this throughout this broadcast, that Hamas did not only murder and kidnap Israeli civilians on October 7th, but they kidnapped and murdered nationals of many, many different countries from around the world. Why are they being released today, these 5 Thai civilians? Because they're not part of this first phase agreement.
Well, you know, why are they released today and why were they held by Hamas? Like, what's the political gain? Hamas gains very little from holding Thai nationals. It's not a pressure, it's not leverage on Israeli decision makers, and they don't stand to gain anything from the Thai government. So what bewilders me is, why did they keep them for so long? My simplistic answer is their cruelty and the fact that they could, and the fact that nobody really applied pressure on Hamas to release them. I'll remind everybody that there was a group of, I believe, 20 Thai nationals that were released in the first round, almost a year ago, which, I mean, made sense because from a political, military point of view, they have very little importance for Hamas and Israel. And from a humane point of view, of course, they should have been taken in the first. Nobody should have been taken. But if they were taken and if there are bargaining cards, then of course they should have been released very early on. They're not part of the conflict and they have nothing to do, and Hamas doesn't stand to gain anything. So it's quite astonishing that they were held on for so long, and it's quite astonishing, you know, to see the relative quiet.
Okay, so we're seeing right now the images of Arbel Yehud surrounded. I think those are both Palestinian, Islamic Jihad and Hamas. We see the green headband of Hamas.
And the black.
And the black. We see these scenes of her. She looks very distressed. I mean, very, very distressed. And you can only imagine, of course, who wouldn't be in such a situation. They're struggling to contain her from the mobs that are, you know, they're making their way through really chaotic scenes, and for her to have to go through this after, you know, almost 16 months in captivity is just unimaginable.
It's just terrible, as you said, at this last, and what a contrast between those and what we see the earlier footage when she was with Gadi. And you can only imagine what Gadi Moses was going through. We do see, though, three vehicles on the move now. I hope that's a good sign.
Let's
or
hope
more
so.
for that.
And
all the hostages
I want to
were in
hear
those
from you.
vehicles.
You were saying that we're seeing, you know, maybe you can analyze those images of Arbel coming out. Who is surrounding her? What more can you tell us?
Yes, very, very easily. We can say that in one side of the road, the Jihad Islamic, and in the other side is the Hamas. We can recognize them by the green and the black. The green is Hamas, and the black bandana is the Jihad Islamic. Of course, Jihad Islamic wants to show that they are controlling the hostages because they were holding them all this time. And Hamas wants to show that they are controlling all the event because Jihad Islamic is under the Hamas. And this kind of conflict, we can see it also on the ground. We can see the conflict between them. And this is what is getting all the chaos together against our people. And of course, the mob surrounding them, not one of them we can say that they are humanitarian. They are still the same people that entered inside Israel 7th of October with the Hamas, so-called civilian that we can say in one hand that they are not a jihadi Hamas or a jihadi Islamic, but they are controlling everything like they are still a terrorist as we see. We can see now the Red Cross people doing some kind of negotiation with the Hamas. I hope all of the hostages already in the cars of the Red Cross, and
yeah,
they
so
hope that will be...
We're receiving word that Gadi Moses has also made it into the Red Cross vehicle. So right now, Arbel Yehud, Gadi Moses, both with the Red Cross, they've been transferred over from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in these scenes, these chaotic scenes, but they've made it into the Red Cross vehicles. And now I want to turn to Shosh and Ariella in Hostages Square. You know, we saw some of the footage coming out of Hostages Square, this very tense atmosphere there as people were watching these chaotic scenes unfolding. Now that we know Arbel and Gadi are in the hands of the Red Cross, Ariel, Shosh, what can you tell us?
Yeah, this is a nail-biting moment for people here in Hostage Square watching this live stream. People waiting, actually biting their nails, waiting for these hostages to come out. It's been a long wait. We've been waiting for PIJ to release these hostages. We saw swarms of people, but the mood was tense, and it was... although it was chaotic there, it felt a little bit chaotic here, of people just waiting. We have hostage families actually in the front now, and once we did see a sight of Arbel, that's when the tears came down. Finally, when we saw Arbel making her way through this crowd as this small female with men surrounding her. You see people covering their faces. You have guns, weapons surrounding her, people pushing in. Imagine the chaos that's going on in her mind. She was just in captivity for 480 days. It's unknown if she was held with anyone, and now she comes out to see swarms of people just almost swallowing them as they bring her through this pathway.
Absolutely. It's been a very staggered celebration, really. It's been, you know, we've had a celebrations there, and then the past hour, I'd say, has just been beyond intense. Everyone's been holding their breath. I mean, my heart's been racing. I don't know about yours, but we've heard celebrations when we saw Arbel, and now we've just had another wave now. Israeli flags are waving, Thai flags are also waving. Someone popped a champagne bottle a few minutes ago. So hopefully now we'll have some reassurance that they are in the safe hands. We're just waiting for the confirmation, waiting to hear that with the IDF. But it's been a very intense hour, I'd say.
For sure, and as we're waiting to confirm if Gadi is also in the hands of the Red Cross, it's unclear. We know that Arbel has made it into the hands of the Red Cross. We're still waiting for the final confirmation. For Israelis, the moments that they can really captivate and understand this is when they're in the hands of the IDF. For them, that's when this is official. There's a lot of distrust when it comes to the Red Cross here in Israel, based on them not really supporting, not doing barely anything to help these hostages for the last 480 days. So right now, We're still waiting. There will be more and more cheers of people, I'm assuming. But when we did see that first sign of life of Arbel coming out, the tears really came down. It just speaks to the people. Ariel, you mentioned before that everyone here in Israel feels what these families are going through, what these hostages are going through. You might not have those same lived experience, but in Israel, everyone has this connection to each other.
Absolutely, for sure. I mean, you could, as the morning's gone on, as the day is going on, more and more people have gathered. Of course, it's the Thursday, it's the middle of the day, so people are at work, so it's quieter than when there have been releases at the night. But everyone here is not related to a hostage, but every single person here is feeling the anxiety, feeling the excitement, feeling the hope, feeling the fear. As you said, there's not so much trust in the Red Cross. We've also seen with the releases last week, they are standing on the vehicle and smashing the windows. So until we hear that they are with the IDF and on Israeli soil, I think that's when we'll have that sigh of relief, and we'll have some hope.
Another thing that Ariella mentioned is we see a Thai flag waving in the crowd here. Why does that matter? That matters because 5 Thai nationals are coming out today. These are people that were likely workers on one of the kibbutzim. They were taken. They were here trying to get a better life, right? These are people that moved from their home country, trying to make more money, trying to help their own families. They were taken and have been held captive for 480 days. You know, we say sometimes it feels like these Thai nationals, these other nationals held in captivity might be forgotten, but in Israel, by the people of Israel, they are not forgotten. They are talked about. People want to know that they're coming out. Tell us a little bit more about the deal.
They'll go through the same procedure and process as Israeli hostages. They'll come out, they'll be met with a translator as well, and go through all the same assessments and checks. And then once they are confirmed to be stable, okay as you can be, they'll be given the go-ahead to go home. You know, they'll also be met by relatives and family members and loved ones. But I mean, this just goes to show that Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, it's not about, you know, this isn't about resistance. These Thai nationals were working. They were farm workers, and they've spent nearly 16 months in Hamas captivity. And as I said before, they've been treated brutally. We know from hostages who were previously released, they received heaps of racism, violence, physical abuse, verbal abuse. So they're absolutely not to be forgotten in the past 16 months.
Lidar?
Absolutely. And we're seeing the scenes again. We have confirmation that both Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses are in the hands of the Red Cross in the vehicles. But what we're seeing now on screen, Jonathan, I mean, it looks like they're having trouble getting out of this mob.
Yeah, looks like they're having to reverse out. Obviously, very chaotic. And what struck my mind when I saw the footage of Arbel being led out, you know, if you look at her hands, she was clutching the hand of a Hamas terrorist, and her finger was white like paper. You could only imagine how stressed she was and the level of fear and anxiety that she was undergoing, surrounded by these thugs that have jailed her and kept her for so many months. And they are allegedly leading her out, and you can see how strongly she's clutching the hand of that Hamas terrorist, who I hope won't see many more days of sunlight. But
holding her hands of her captors,
yes, in order to get out, and you can see how white the finger is here.
Yeah.
It's really astonishing. What a brave young woman, and what she must be enduring. What can help her heal in the future will, of course, be the love of her family and the love of Am Yisrael that will embrace her back and hopefully help her heal after that tremendous ordeal, made even worse by the way that she is released. And it's not over. Even though she reportedly is in Red Cross vehicles, there's many kilometers or miles to ride from Khan Yunis to the nearest exit point. Ironically, maybe she will be brought close to an exit point to her home kibbutz. Hopefully that ride will be smoother than the exit, but it's just so tremendously traumatic to be brought out like that.
Right, of course she's not going to the kibbutz now, should be a thing. And we should maybe, though, mention that's part of the recovery is they're going back to a community near Oz, and I've been down there, that's just been devastated. So many of the people that they knew were killed in that attack. I mean, that is a community, one of the worst, along with, say, with Berry, that is trying to recover. This is, I guess, a happy day for them in terms of getting two of their family back. But and that's part of the road to recovery. But just think about what it means just for that one kibbutz, that one community, which apparently was a very close-knit community.
Yeah, a quarter of that community was either murdered or taken hostage of Niroz, and it was the community that, sadly, where the failure of the IDF to defend was the largest. The IDF never got there.
Yeah.
Terrorists went in, ravaged, murdered, Palestinian civilians went in, did their thing, looted, and then many hours after the terrorists had left, only then the Israeli security forces came back. And that's a community that has, I would say, collective trauma. But Israelis are strong. Israelis are resilient, and the family ties and the bond between people and the support that they're getting from Jews overseas. I think Avital made an important point before that I think we should remember, that yes, we in Israel are watching this, but so many Jews around the world are watching this, and it is a tremendous moment of joy for Jews around the world who have prayed, contributed money, petitioned, lobbied, and really done so much in order to bring this about. It is heartwarming, and I know that Israeli hostages coming back, they will have support.
Absolutely. And not just the Israeli hostages, the Thai hostages as well. We're getting word now that they are also being loaded into the Red Cross vehicles. They've made their way through the mobs to the Red Cross vehicles, and they will also hopefully be taking off shortly on their way into Israeli territory. And again, as we say, and I think as Shosh and Ariella pointed out, you know, until they're not back in the IDF hands, until they're not on Israeli soil, I don't think any of us here in the studio are going to be sighing, a breath of relief. And we saw sort of these tense and disturbing visuals of Arbel making her way through the crowd. We don't have visuals yet of Gadi Moses, 80 years old, but I mean, you can only imagine that he went through sort of the same trauma as Arbel, walking through into the Red Cross. And so, you know, we're waiting to hear confirmation about the ties, but in the meantime, you know, we're seeing these photos.
These chaotic scenes, indeed. And what I think we should also think about, you know, maybe civilians, when most people that are seeing this aren't thinking about it, I look at these images also from a military perspective. Mm-hmm. I think about future targeting. I think about location of terrorists. I think about personnel, weapons, insignia, etc. This is really a good opportunity for Israeli intel to be monitoring. Yes, there are restrictions on what Israel has agreed to restrictions. So this is Hostage Square, it looks like.
This is Hostage Square, and we're seeing U.S. President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, who's in Israel. He is now in Hostages Square. He's made it to Hostages Square with all, you know, the people, the families watching the release. We're seeing images of him now making his way through Hostages Square.
And that's after he visited Gaza yesterday.
Yes.
And I think this is a pretty interesting approach to diplomacy, much more of a hands-on approach that we've seen. Actually going to Gaza, a combat zone which is very hostile to a U.S. envoy.
I think he was the first U.S. envoy to step foot in Gaza in over a decade.
Yeah, and I mean, that tells you a little bit, I think,
much more
about
hands-on approach.
Hands-on and seriousness and earnestness, and really the devotion here to get this done. We've seen that from President Trump, and it appears that his envoy is also leading by example, which I think is a very refreshing approach for diplomats, and I encourage all diplomats to do the same, because there's nothing like being on the ground, and the symbolism of being on the ground and what that means is significant. And it's good. I know that many hostage families are very appreciative of Envoy Witkoff and his contribution. They said so in the statement. The families last week of the three Israeli soldiers, the female soldiers that were released, they expressed a lot of gratitude. and he's probably very well received here as well.
Right.
Yeah.
It's quite remarkable. Remember, he's someone with no diplomatic or government experience who was, just until recently, basically an American Jewish New York City real estate developer. We've seen President Trump basically if you look at people who have been involved in his Mideast policy and played key roles, like former Ambassador David Friedman, who was a tax lawyer, and also
Kushner.
Jared Kushner, who also basically worked in New York
in real estate.
And Jason Greenblatt also. He draws people more from the business world than the diplomatic world. One advantage is they don't come with some of the preconceived notions of some of the long-term diplomats. And I think one thing is they see it more as, okay, we have a problem, we have to solve it, and how do we move on that, rather than, for example, some of those, however you want to call it, cliches or ideas that are developed about diplomacy go.
Yeah, so we want to head now to Ariella and Shosh, who are in Hostages Square. You just saw the arrival of U.S. President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff. What can you tell us? A surprise visit to Hostages Square.
Wow, what a moment. He actually walked right behind us. He had secret security. Yeah, we did double take. He had security guards all around him, but pretty loosely he was being able to walk through this area. We stopped for a minute and realized it really was Steve Witkoff. He's obviously here for a reason. This deal that he helped bring to fruition is a moment that so many hostage families have been waiting for. As he made his way into the crowd here, people stopped him just to say thank you, that they support him, they support the administration. Screaming, thank you, thank you. Family members of these hostages going up to him, shaking their hands. The fact that he made this surprise visit, shocking to so many. People were right by the Hakiria. Obviously, this is a very important area to Israel, government buildings, headquarters for the IDF. So he's here right now as this deal is in motion. It's in play as we speak. Yeah, it's crazy.
Absolutely, and many people attribute that, this deal coming into fruition to him and Trump's administration. So to see him now, family members come up to him, thanking him, as you said, hugging him, it's a real moment that he's here right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And to see him walk through here, eventually people realized once he was making his way through, okay, this is Steve Witkoff. This is the guy so many people in Israel, like you said, credit for getting this deal done. And that's obviously why he's here. He's here to make an appearance. The father of one of the hostages, Omri Miran, his father was here trying to shake his hand, trying to just say thank you in any way that he possibly can for helping this deal come to fruition. Omri Miran is likely going to come out, hopefully in the second phase of this deal. But this is Steve Witkoff for so many Israelis.
Right, and it was beautiful to see him just come through. No big announcement, no big arrival. He just walked from the street into Hostage Square, into the crowd, and really gave everyone the opportunity to come up to him and say thank you, and just to show that he supports us and he stands with us. Physically, he was standing with us just now.
Yeah, Lidar.
Absolutely. So really a surprise visit, and we got word that he also visited Beilinson Hospital, where the 4 IDF observers are being held, and where Agam Berger is set to be transferred later today. Now, we're still seeing some of the scenes unfold as the Thai nationals are still being transferred over to the Red Cross. It seems like the mob has died down a little bit. We're not seeing such huge crowds anymore. It seems that the Thai hostages are now also in the hands of the Red Cross, and they are all making their way back to Israel. And we received a report, Jonathan, you just received a report that the Israeli government is really angry at the scenes that we saw unfold today during this hostage release.
Yeah, I think what I understand is that Israel has made a formal and very strong complaint through the negotiation channels because of the scenes, because of the chaotic, mismanaged and horrible scenes that we saw that Agam Berger had to go through, and I suppose that the others went through a similar ordeal. It's just preposterous to see this level of lack of control, bullying, violence, and adding trauma on trauma. That is the last thing that Israel needs, all the hostages need, for anything to go wrong by their mismanagement. And going forward, hopefully, and I know this isn't the last time that the Islamic Jihad will be releasing hostages, they need to really shape up. Otherwise, I suppose there will be consequences from Israel. And I was saying before, and this connects with that point, this is a good opportunity for Israel to be collecting intel. The war continues. This is now, we're in a ceasefire, but during ceasefire, you collect intelligence, you replenish, you do your logistics, you fix what you need to fix on your own side, and you continue to collect intelligence on the enemy. And what we're seeing here is a lot of intel that hopefully will be translated into targeting processes once the fighting resumes. And important and interesting to see lots of things about the location, where they're coming from, where they were held. Israeli intel officers, they're trying to make this three-dimensional puzzle of where the hostages were held, who held them, and now they're trying to match these images with the geolocation and, of course, everything that's available on open source intel, and matching that with other sources of intelligence. And then, of course, when they are debriefing the hostages themselves, into very small details, where they were kept, who they were in contact with, who visited them, when did they move, how were they moved, and the locations, the sounds, the smells, etc. And then try to build some kind of a picture that will be important to understand what happened, but for the future, if the second part of the deal fails, and if Hamas refuses to bring back hostages, then of course the military options are back on the table. And then there's a lot to be learned from the freed hostages and from these images, and to try to understand, okay, how can we get our hostages out by our capacity the next time, which is something that I think is on the table, and Israel obviously needs to and is preparing to do.
I'd also add, if Palestinian Islamic Jihad thought they would score some propaganda points outside of Gaza or its immediate supporters, they failed miserably with this scene.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the single shot from this show here that's going to be reproduced the most will be Arbel looking frightened and intimidated in the midst of all those armed men. That will be the lasting image from there, and that certainly will not help if they have something you could call a cause, their cause in that regard.
Absolutely. I think this was, if they did have any hope that this would be a nice PR show, they've failed miserably. I just want to say, by the way, thank you to Amit Asa, who had to leave the studio. So thank you to Amit for his commentary today. And so right now we are waiting for confirmation that Arbel Yehoud and Gadi Moses will be transferred to the IDF. They still have quite a ways to make from Khan Yunis back here into Israel. And so we are waiting to hear confirmation that they've reached IDF hands, that they've been transferred and being brought back to Israel. Well, they will first go to an army base to be reunited with their families, and then afterwards will be taken to different hospitals to begin the rehabilitation process. Now, Jonathan, I want to turn to you again. You know, we're seeing these visuals, we're seeing these mobs, we're seeing the armed men. It's very clear, and I think you said that at the beginning, that we're not where we want to be 15 months in. And so, you know, what are the capabilities of Hamas, of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad today, and what should Israel's next steps be?
Yeah, it's difficult to, talk strategy when we're seeing such moving scenes, but let's do that for a second. So more than 15 or about 15 months of fighting at different levels, varying levels of intensity, started out with high intensity against Hamas in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, continued with other high intensity operations in Khan Yunis and Rafah. I would characterize our military achievements by a lack to preserve momentum and a lack of the Israeli government to obtain international legitimacy and to facilitate momentum for military operations. And really the center of gravity in the Gaza Strip today is humanitarian aid. He who controls the humanitarian aid controls the population and therefore is sovereign in the Gaza Strip. And as far as we go, currently, that is Hamas. Hamas controls the goods, Hamas taxes the goods, and Hamas uses the humanitarian aid as leverage and as a means to control the civilian population. And as long as that is the case, Hamas governs Gaza, and Israel will not achieve its strategic aims of defeating them militarily and getting rid of them from an administrative point of view.
I just want to, 1 second, I want to
landing.
show our viewers. Agam Berger is now landing at Bellinson Hospital. You can see a crowd of people with yellow balloons greeting her, and she's made her way, after reuniting with her parents, she's made her way now by helicopter to Bellinson Hospital, where she will be reunited with her 4 friends, the 4 IDF observers who were released last Saturday, and she will begin her rehabilitation process after going through a series of medical tests at Bellinson Hospital. So we see now Agam, the first visuals of Agam arriving by helicopter. Jonathan, back to you.
Yeah.
You were saying.
So, and what we need to be doing forward is to, first and foremost, have a plan to defeat Hamas. Understanding that the center of gravity and the way to really defeat Hamas relates to governing the Gaza Strip and actually taking away the most crucial asset that Hamas has today, which is not rockets, not tunnels, and not their operatives and not their commandos. Those assets have been degraded very significantly by the IDF. The center of gravity today in Gaza is the delivery of food and aid. What Israel needs to do is to formalize a plan and to be clear about that this is where we're going. Israel needs to have this harmonized and coordinated with the Americans, and to say that the moment that Hamas violates the ceasefire, which I am pretty sure that they will do, because if I was Hamas, I wouldn't hand over all the hostages, and I think that they may start a second deal, and they may start handing over a number of Israeli hostages, but at some stage they'll find an excuse and they will violate the terms of the agreement. That will be the moment when Israel will have to have a plan ready, coordinated with the Americans, whereby Israel will act differently than what we acted during 15 months of fighting, where the aim will be a total destruction of Hamas. It will come at a significant price for the entire Gaza Strip, but the whole framing of the event needs to be different, whereby Israel needs to be very clear, speak in one voice, and have the entire establishment, coalition, opposition, defense establishment on the same page, saying, we are serious about defeating Hamas. In order to do so, we are going to take these steps that will ensure the ability to defeat them. And it includes being inside the Gaza Strip, and it includes taking control over that crucial process of providing food. As long as we don't do that, no amount of military activity against Hamas will actually defeat Hamas, because their tactics is one of delaying, of extending the time, of hiding in their tunnels underground, using the civilians as their human shields, and relying on international pressure on Israel to stop the fighting. And of course, leveraging the hostages that they have done very effectively over these last weeks. So what is in store for Israel and Gaza, the moment that Hamas will violate this ceasefire, is probably much more serious and worse for Gazans than what they endured during the last 15 months. If Israel wants to defeat Hamas and to restore peace and safety for Israel, then Hamas needs to be defeated. Hamas will only be defeated once control over Gaza is pried out of their dead cold hands, and that means taking the humanitarian aid from them.
Now, Caleb, I want to turn to you with the question, but before that, I just want to comment for our viewers what we're seeing on the screen right now. We're seeing on the one side the pickup point for Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses in Khan Yunis. It seems now that Gadi Moses and all 5 Thai nationals have been transferred to the Red Cross and are making their way towards Israel. And on the other side of the screen, we're seeing Agam Berger having arrived at Bellinson Hospital, where she's being transferred now to a van. She will be taken to the hospital. She will be reunited with her extended family, her 4 friends who were released last week, and she will undergo a series of medical tests to determine her condition, both physically, mentally, and hopefully she will be able to begin the rehabilitation process. Now, Caleb, I want to turn to you. You know, Jonathan, very adamant that Israel needs to resume the fighting and that Hamas will likely breach this ceasefire because, you know, they're a terrorist organization and of course not to be trusted. And one thing stands out to me in his comments, one thing that's different now, the coordination with the United States. We have a different administration, a new administration, an administration that may not hold Israel back like the Biden administration.
May not.
What are your thoughts on that?
It depends on the circumstances. In other words, clearly, yes, I do think certainly the Trump administration will give greater support to Israel in its battle against Hamas. By the way, it's already doing it in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank. As I said, as I mentioned earlier, this campaign that's being run, especially in the city of Jenin, we have not seen the almost pro forma objections or cautions by the U.S., by the administration. We've seen the Trump administration, President Trump, sign off on the delivery of these powerful bombs that were held back by the Biden administration because of, they said, concern that they would be used in Gaza. So we already are seeing their support. However, keep in mind, President Trump has said he doesn't want to see any, he prefers to see no wars. He wants to see peace. So you can't simply say that he'll just support, give a total blank check to Israel. It has to be under conditions in which, as Jonathan says, there are circumstances laid down, a plan put down that the parties, at least between the U.S. and Israel, there's agreement on, that's presented to the Palestinians and the Arab world. And if they abide by that, then that would proceed. If they don't abide by that, then in those circumstances, I think the Trump administration would support renewed conflict by Israel against Hamas. And by the way, there was an interesting interview with another one of the Trump administration officials that deals with the Middle East the other day, in which the question was raised about Jordan and Egypt refusing to take in the Palestinians, at least even temporarily, from Gaza. And he said, okay, they're refusing. What is their alternative?
Yeah.
What is their alternative going to be? If they don't like that plan, give us something else. And I think that, in a sense, was throwing down the gauntlet to countries like Egypt and Jordan, saying, by the way, okay, you don't want to take Gazans in, then you have to get into Gaza. This is something that's been discussed. Are we going to see countries like the Gulf states, like maybe Jordan, like Egypt, particularly Egypt, which has a responsibility for Gaza because it shares that border, get involved, be willing, for example, to put personnel within Gaza, maybe take over the distribution of humanitarian aid and oversee that process, something that the Israeli government has said they don't want to see the Palestinian Authority do. So far, those countries have declined to do that. They said they want to see the Palestinian Authority take over that. And I think the Trump administration is sort of laying down its plan, saying, no, you have to get involved in Gaza. You have to take part in the governance of Gaza. And if you're not willing to do that, then don't start complaining when we give the green light to Israel to renew its military activity. So I think it is all part of this sort of negotiation process going on.
And that is sort of a new approach because the Biden administration did not take that approach with Egypt or with Jordan. We didn't see them placing much pressure on either of them. And now, as you said, Trump is putting the pressure, he's putting the responsibility on them as well. I mean, something that has been largely ignored in the international media is that Egypt shares a border with Gaza, not just Israel. Egypt shares a border with Gaza, and they have closed that border, sealed it off, and have not let any Palestinians through. They have not, right, Jonathan, I see you nodding along. I mean, you know, they've done absolutely nothing, and so now maybe there's a change of tactics.
I mean, Egypt, I think, is really part of the problem. In my view, Egypt is accountable and should be held accountable for this war. Egypt has been playing a very clever double game. On one hand, they have been allowing full knowledge of Egyptian leadership and the military, the flow of weapons almost uninterrupted through Sinai, into Rafah, into the tunnels, and into Gaza, or in the above-ground crossing, the Rafah crossing that the Egyptians manage. weapons, the tremendous, copious amounts of weapons that Hamas and Islamic Jihad have in Gaza, they didn't appear from nowhere. They weren't manufactured there, and they weren't imported from Israel. They were brought in through Egypt. That's one thing. Egypt has been playing this double game by allowing the weapons in and then negotiating ceasefires from its own interest, and then getting international credit for doing so. So from an Egyptian perspective, Gaza is the gift that kept on giving, because many Egyptian officers got rich of kickbacks that they were getting from letting the weapons in. And then Egypt, on the international political level, were getting lots of credits for brokering ceasefires. My complaints isn't to Egypt. I don't expect Egypt to do good by Israel. I expect my government to apply tremendous pressure on Egypt to do good by us. And we haven't. We have been very, very soft with Egypt. Our policy over the last, let's say, 20 years towards Egypt has been one of complacency, where we are playing nice with the Egyptians, admiring their involvement in Gaza, where we have been helping Egypt with their counter-terrorism operations in Sinai against ISIS and against other entities that they have struggled with intelligence, with targeting, with air force, with special forces, many things. Israel has been allowing the Egyptians to violate the 1979 peace agreement, and Sinai is today full of Egyptian troops in violation of that accord, which Israel is allowing. And what have we gotten in return? An armed-to-the-teeth terrorist state in Gaza, where weapons have come in from Egypt, and tunnels that have been open for 25 years, that the Egyptians have not done anything serious to stop. And this has been allowed to continue and continue. So Egypt, in my mind, they are part of the problem. Just like Qatar is part of the problem, Egypt is part of the problem. But my gripe is with my government, not with Egypt. We should be tougher on Egypt. There are so many levers, economic and military levers of pressure that can be applied on Egypt, either directly or indirectly, that haven't been entertained. And we need to, I think we need to do that. And I think this new approach of diplomacy should be active.
Right, and let's keep in mind that Egypt is also the second biggest recipient of U.S. foreign aid after Israel, and that also gives the U.S. some leverage on Egypt. And in fact, just this week, the United States, the Trump administration put a temporary freeze on all foreign aid, with the two exceptions, Israel and Egypt. And I think one of that part of that is for, again, the Trump administration. And President Trump said he spoke with Sisi. It isn't clear that he actually spoke with him personally. There's some disagreement, but there's some clear tension going on now between Cairo and Washington. And I think it relates exactly to what Jonathan was saying.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, we are seeing now, or should be going up on the screen, yes, the first images that were released of the reunion between Agam Berger and her parents, a very emotional reunion. We can see them crying, really powerful images.
הבטחה של אימא, הבטחה של אימא.
So really powerful, emotional images of Agam Berger reuniting with her parents after 482 days. Just unbelievable. Very, I guess, bittersweet is the word. Very joyful to see these images. But we want to go back now one last time to Ariella and Shosh for a quick overview, a quick summary of all the events that have transpired so far today.
Yeah, emotional moments for a lot of people. Now that we have the last female soldier out of captivity, we have the last one of the last female civilians out of captivity, and the first male and one of the oldest hostages out of captivity. Today's a historic day for so many people, so many families finally reuniting with their loved ones. They've waited 482 plus days for, to see them walk out on their own 2 feet. Of course, we don't know their conditions. It looks as if they might be in stable condition, but what we know, doctors say do not be fooled by their outer appearance. What matters is the time that it'll take to determine their mental state, the trauma they endured.
Absolutely. It's been an emotional roller coaster today to see 8 hostages released, but staggered and quite a traumatic release, I have to say, from Agam all by herself on a stage to Arbel and Gadi walking through mobs. But it seems they'll be on Israeli soil very soon, and as you said, now there is only 1 female hostage left in captivity, that is Shiri Biba, so we'll hope to see her home very soon, but promising to see them on their way home.
Yeah. Lidar.
Absolutely, and we're getting just now an official comment from the Prime Minister's office, from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's in Hebrew, so I'll try and translate as we go. He's criticizing the images that we've seen today. These, he calls them horrific images that we've seen during the hostage release, and he says it is yet another example of the, unimaginable savagery that we're seeing by the Hamas terrorist organization. And he said that Israel, as Jonathan, as you mentioned, that he is demanding from the mediators to ensure that these types of threats do not happen again in the future for the next hostages release. And we are expected to see 3 additional hostages, 3 additional male hostages released this Saturday. We still don't know who these male hostages will be, but they are also set to be released by Hamas on Saturday. And in the meantime, we have Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses and 5 Thai nationals making their way from Gaza, from these chaotic, horrific scenes that we've seen today, making their way in Red Cross vehicles now towards Israel, towards their first rendezvous with the IDF. Then they will be transferred here into Israel to an army base to be reunited with their families and then sent on to hospitals. So I just want to hear final thoughts from Jonathan. Let's start with you.
Yeah, so we're looking forward towards, very happy to see and relieved to see that they are indeed, at least in the convoy with the Red Cross, on their way to Israel, and hopefully they will be reunited with their families soon. Looking forward towards Saturday, the release of 3 additional. And then, as we are speaking and as Israeli hostages are being returned, negotiations are ongoing for the second part of the deal, the even more crucial and sensitive part of the deal, for the release of male hostages. 65 Israeli men are in Hamas captivity, many of them sadly dead, murdered by Hamas, some of them alive. We don't have visibility on that yet. And this will be really the fork in the road that will determine the future of the Gaza Strip and the conflict between Hamas and Israel. If Hamas fulfills this agreement and returns all of the hostages, then they just might get to stay alive. If they don't, and if they fail to do so, what that means, according to my logic, we will return to fighting, and the future for Hamas and for Gaza will be very, very dire, and that is going to be decided in the coming weeks.
Absolutely. Caleb, final thoughts on this sort of emotional
roller coaster. Yeah. The images there we're seeing of Agam Berger with her parents, and then contrast them with the images of Ada Arbel making her way through that mob, that bloodthirsty mob. I mean, it's hard to digest just the contrast between them. I'm glad we're going out on a note of seeing these images, and of course of the convoy seemingly making its way, and perhaps in minutes they'll be making their way to Israeli soil, bringing Gadi and Ehud and the Thai workers to freedom. And yes, I think this is a crucial period coming up. As I said earlier, we have to steel ourselves for the future of the hostage releases, perhaps seeing, unfortunately, different cases, perhaps hostages in better condition than we've seen. We should steel ourselves for that. We should not forget that also the release of Palestinian prisoners today and the pain that's causing to their victims, of friends and family. And also everything what Jonathan said, looking forward to that meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump next week. That is going to be crucial to how this process goes forward.
Absolutely. A very intense week and a very intense day. I'm happy to be able to conclude our broadcast with these beautiful visuals of the reunion of Agam Berger with her parents. Really a joy to be able to report some good news for a change. And so with that, we'll conclude our broadcast. And of course, we will update with any of the latest updates once Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses make their way into Israel, along with the 5 Thai nationals. And of course, continue to watch ILTV for coverage. We'll have live coverage as well on Saturday for the next hostage release. Thank you so much to our panel of experts, Caleb and Jonathan with me here in the studio, and to Ariella and Shosh in Hostages Square. And thank you to you, our viewers, for watching. הוא עזב. Welcome to ILTV's special live broadcast. I'm Lidar Gavelazi, and today we await the return of 3 hostages, Agam Berger, Arbel Yehud, and Gadi Moses, as well as 5 Thai nationals, all set to be released from Hamas captivity in Gaza after over 482 days. Today marks the 3rd release of hostages in this first phase of the Qatar-mediated ceasefire deal. It's a special release today, one that was not pre-planned, but rather renegotiated by Israel after Hamas breached the terms of the original agreement by failing to release Arbel Yehud, a female civilian that was supposed to have been released last week. Joining her today is Agam Berger, the last of the IDF observers, 4 of whom, Liri, Daniela, Neama, and Karina, were released just last week on Saturday. And we already have received word that Agam Berger has been transferred to the IDF. And joining her is Gadi Moses, the first elderly man to be released since the hostages were taken captive over 15 months ago. He is 80 years old, and he's been held for over 15 months of captivity. And Hamas is also releasing 5 civilians from Thailand, not part of the 33 Israelis set to be released in this first phase. I'll remind our viewers that Hamas kidnapped not only Israeli civilians, but nationals of dozens of other countries on October 7th. And today, 5 of them will be released as well. And joining us today for our special broadcast is ILTV's Shosh Bedrosian and Ariella Lechiani reporting from Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, where families of the hostages are gathering to witness the releases today. We'll be with them shortly. And in the studio with me is Caleb Ben-David, journalist and former Israel bureau chief of Bloomberg. And we'll have more guests joining us as well throughout the broadcast. So, Caleb, we're seeing the first visuals coming out of right now Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud, who have been held by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Right. And we've received word that Agam Berger has crossed into Israeli territory.
Right, Lidar, I think today's release is very significant towards basically the future of further releases. Just imagine just a few days ago, there were questions about whether Phase 1 would continue, whether Hamas would give the full list of the 33 hostages, or those are the remaining, their conditions, whether they would honor their agreement to release the civilians first, and of course that came up with Arbel Yehud, whether Islamic Jihad would cooperate with Hamas in terms of the release. And the fact that we're all seeing this happen now, I think the odds went from just, I would say, a few days ago where it was 50-50 if we would see the release of all the further hostages in Phase 1, has now moved more into the positive side of things. I think this bodes well for at least the completion of the Phase 1 hostage release deal.
Absolutely. And we're seeing now the images of Agam Berger's release. She was also paraded on stage, as we saw last week. I mean, how does this compare to last week's release as well, when the 4 girls were paraded on stage? I see we're seeing her in the same sort of military-style attire. She's receiving the certificate of being a hostage.
Yes, I mean...
And the gift bag that they're giving to the hostage is absolutely ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous. Of Hamas, of course, trying to exploit the situation as a so-called victory. There are some slight differences. We don't see the crowds, the masses with guns, which was very alarming in the last release. You had a feeling maybe the situation could explode there and the girls could be in danger. Supposedly, Hamas was pressured by, for example, Qatar, due to objections to this, and maybe they slightly toned it down, but still humiliating, I would say, a last act of abuse against the hostages to display them in this manner. But again, we see her reaction, as we saw from all the hostages released so far, the spirit, the Israeli spirit and the fighting spirit, unbowed after unbelievable conditions in all those months in captivity.
Absolutely. We see the same resilience in these first images of Agam Berger walking. She seems to be, at least, she looks like she's able to walk in decent physical condition. And we know from the hostages released last week that they were actually given supplements ahead of their release to make them look healthier than they actually were. That's been reported
Right.
in the Israeli press.
What we actually also learned is the conditions they were in, months in these tunnels, in darkness, but they were able to draw some strength from each other. Remember, these are the observers. They were soldiers. They're leaving, in a way, kind of as soldiers, because we know Hamas has made them put on uniforms, not their original uniforms.
Yeah.
That was just like another sort of propaganda move of Hamas. But I think what really has surprised people is, as I said before, the resilience, how well certainly the initial round of hostages, especially these young women, have been able to do it. And we see that. We're watching it live right now. Of course, we don't know her mental state and what she went through, but still, just to see those pictures, as distressing as they are to some degree, they are also, to some degree, encouraging in terms of the spirit of these young women.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've gotten word that Agam Berger has crossed over into Israeli territory, so she is back home in Israel after 482 days in captivity. So that is absolutely wonderful news. And soon we hope to see Gadi Moses and Albel Yehud be released and be transferred to the Red Cross and then to the IDF. So we're seeing images on the screen again of really mobs. I mean, you can see this.
Sure.
And right now, I think we're seeing Albel Yehud and Gadi Moses making their way through these Palestinian mobs, Hamas supporters, Hamas terrorists, making their way over to be transferred to the Red Cross. You know, now this is a bit of a different circumstances because Albel Yehud, Gadi Moses, they were not held by Hamas. They were held by a separate terrorist faction, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Right, which is why I think it's so significant that they're being released today. There was concern whether Islamic Jihad would cooperate with the hostage deal that was basically negotiated by Hamas. There were even reports that, for example, their release might be delayed even today because, of course, Palestinian Islamic Jihad takes its marching orders from Iran, and whether Iran would want to, in some way, complicate this hostage deal, certainly to exploit it. So it is very encouraging if that is indeed the cars carrying the two. I also have to say, Gadi Moses, that's one of the big surprises of today. You showed earlier a bit of footage of where he and Arbel were hugging each other. Gadi Moses, 80 years old. There was a lot of concern about his condition, one of the oldest remaining hostages. I spoke several times during the course of the past year with Yair Moses, his son, who expressed concern about his father's health, whether he might get medication he needs. And Gadi Moses looking, I would say, again, we don't know because we don't know the mental condition they're in or really what they're ailing, but certainly to see him seem in reasonably good condition allays a lot of the fears that we were going into.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at this, you know, mobs just running after the car with Gadi Moses and Albel Yehud inside. You can only imagine what's going through their minds right now. It's seeing these scenes, seeing these mobs of I mean, really thousands of people, it seems, have gathered there. And
this is Khan Yunis. They were released there, and that's a real stronghold of Hamas. They were actually released in what they called Sinwar Square initially. They had their, I guess, brief ceremony, which would have been the home of Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader.
Yeah, so we're seeing them surrounded. It's unclear which car they're in, but we're told that they are in one of the vehicles and that they will be transferred. Now, it's interesting to see if the Palestinian Islamic Jihad will put them through the same show that Hamas has been putting the hostages. I mean, what can you tell from these pictures? I don't see a stage.
No, I think that process may have already been or happened. I mean, I don't know. I mean, those cars appear to be the Red Cross cars that we saw earlier. So I don't know if that indicates that they've already been put in. We don't know fully what happened in their transfer. You know, that footage we saw earlier of Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud was obviously taken earlier in the morning. So there's a couple of hours where we don't have the footage yet of what took place during their release. So that may come out later. So I don't know if they're taking them. But those do look like the Red Cross cars, which means that they're already on their way to be handed over, for example, to the IDF. It may take a little longer. Khan Yunis is on the southern edge, more in the, not southern edge, but more in the southern half of the Gaza Strip. So they have a little longer to go, and you can see they're moving quite, if these are live images, they're moving quite slowly there. So this may take a little more time than the release we saw of Agam Berger earlier. But again, it's of course distressing to see these kind of pictures. And the IDF was active in Khan Yunis, invested a tremendous amount of military effort, especially destroying the tunnel system there, which was considered sort of almost like became the headquarters of Hamas. And again, a show of strength, in this case by Islamic Jihad, which is, again, just really basically a tool of Iran, their sort of proxy force in the Gaza Strip.
Absolutely. And from what we understand as well, you know, Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses were not held together, but they were reunited this morning.
Right, but correct, but they are both from kibbutz near Oz, both kidnapped from them. Gadi Moses was apparently one of the most leading figures of the kibbutz. He's actually an agronomist of some international renown, a prominent figure. So they certainly do have familiarity with each other, and you could see that in that earlier footage. When they were released. Both, of course, have family members and loved ones that were killed during the October 7th assault on Nir Oz. So you could see that in the reaction to each other.
Yes, you can see the affection, sort of he hugs her. You really see that affection there. Absolutely. And what we're seeing now are just, I mean, thousands of Palestinians, looks like mostly men, surrounding the vehicles. We are waiting to see the first images of Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud being transferred over to the Red Cross. And right now we're just seeing mobs surrounding the vehicles. We see a number of vehicles there. It's unclear if those are the Palestinian Islamic Jihad vehicles or the Red Cross vehicles.
Right. It's hard. Though obviously one looks like has a Palestinian flag. I assume that is from Hamas or the PIJ. It's now they're not even moving at all. I mean, this again, I stress this was the handover that generated the most concern, because Palestinian Islamic Jihad, basically, even though it functions sort of under Hamas, it has its own chain of command structure, and a lot of concern about the details of this. So this is the one that really gave people a lot of concern going in, and hopefully it's going to be completed without any complications.
Yeah. All right, and now I want to transfer over to Shosh Bedrosian and Ariella Lechiani, who are standing by in Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. What's the atmosphere like there? What can you tell us?
Yeah, so a very exciting atmosphere here. Both of us arrived, and Zariel is actually first time being in Hostage Square since this hostage release first began just a few weeks ago. Tell us what your impression of it. For me, it is a lot of people have started to fill up this square. When you have walked in, what's it like for you to be here?
Electrifying. I've not experienced anything like this. The last hostage release, I was at the hospital, and it was different. We were waiting, it was lots of press, but this, friends, family, you know, this for the past 16 months almost has been a spot where people rally and protest, and for everyone to come together here with some excitement, with some hope. It's magical. It's amazing to be here.
Exactly. It's a special moment to see this square filled with hope. There's a different feeling being in Hostage Square now. A lot of Agam Berger's friends are actually here. They have signs. When that video came out of her on stage inside of Gaza and her being handed over from Hamas to the Red Cross, it was a very exciting moment. Their posters were in the air. They were screaming. They were watching the live stream here. It's being broadcasted on the big screen. What was it like for you to see the friends in real time react to the news that she is out and she's coming home?
It's something that I think we've all said collectively in Israel, that you feel you know these people, you feel connected to them, you love them, you miss them, we're all waiting for them to come home. So to be present when her actual loved ones are here and celebrate celebrating that. I mean, it's beyond moving to be a part of that, and it embodies what I think the whole country's been feeling for 16 months. We're all waiting for all the hostages to come home. So it's incredible. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, and Lidar, you mentioned before that Gadi Moses